Night settles softly over the wide American countryside, and the land grows still in the way only open land can. The fields, stretched long beneath a pale moon, rest quietly after the slow labor of the day. Far from the noise of crowded towns, far from busy roads and hurried footsteps, there is only the gentle breath of the wind moving across the grass, the faint rustle of dry corn leaves, and the low wooden creak of an old farmhouse easing into the cool darkness. It is here, in this quiet place, that we begin. Imagine a narrow dirt path winding between fields and fences, worn smooth by wagon wheels, boots, and years of patient use. The earth beneath it is dark and firm, carrying the memory of rain and sun, season after season. On either side, the fields lie open like a soft patchwork quilt stitched from soil, wheat, corn, and pasture grass. In the dim silver light of evening, everything seems gentler, slower, and more forgiving. The farmhouse stands at the center of it all. It is not large, and it is not grand. Its wooden boards are weathered by many winters and many summers, faded by sunlight and polished by wind. The porch leans just slightly, as if it too has grown old with the family who lives inside. A lantern glows faintly in the window, warm and golden against the dark blue of the night, and that little square of light feels almost like a welcome from another century. Inside this house, the day has only just come to a close. The life of an early American farmer was never fast. It moved with the sun, with the seasons, with the weather, and with the quiet needs of the land. Morning began early, often before the first pale line of dawn touched the horizon. But now, as we enter this story, the day is ending, and the house is filled with the soft peace that comes after long, honest work. A small fire burns in the hearth. The flames are low now, no longer bright and lively, but calm and steady, giving off a soft orange glow that warms the room and throws slow-moving shadows across the walls. The scent of wood smoke lingers in the air, mixed with the smell of fresh bread that had been baked earlier in the day, and the faint earthy scent of boots left by the door. The farmer sits in a wooden chair near the fire. His hands are large and rough, shaped by years of work with plow, shovel, rope, and axe. The skin across his knuckles is worn and cracked from cold mornings and dry summer heat. These are hands that know the land well. Hands that have planted seeds into spring soil, lifted heavy baskets at harvest, repaired fences after storms, and guided horses through the long furrows of the field. Tonight, those hands are still. The room is quiet except for the occasional pop from the fire and the slow ticking of time that seems almost to disappear into the silence. Somewhere upstairs, floorboards creak softly as the rest of the family settles into sleep. A child turns beneath a blanket. A door opens and closes gently. Then stillness returns. Outside, the farm waits for tomorrow. This is the rhythm of the farmer's life. Nothing happens quickly here. Nothing is rushed. Every task has its time, and every season asks for something different. The land teaches patience in ways that cannot be hurried. Seeds do not grow faster because one wishes them to. Rain does not come because one asks. The harvest arrives only when the earth is ready. And so life moves slowly. In the early years of America, for many farming families, each day was built from the same quiet pieces. Dawn. Fire. Bread. Animals. Field work. Water. Wood. Supper. Rest. Then morning again. There was comfort in this repetition. Long before sunrise, while the world was still gray and cool, the farmer would wake to the faint chill of the room. The fire in the hearth would have burned down to glowing coals, and the house would be wrapped in deep silence. Rising from bed, careful not to disturb the others, he would dress in sturdy clothes, simple and practical. Linen shirt, wool trousers, thick socks, heavy boots. Then came the first sound of the day. The opening of the front door. It would groan softly on its hinges as the farmer stepped out into the cold morning air. Sometimes the grass would be wet with dew, sparkling in the first weak light of dawn. Sometimes frost would cover the ground in a thin white layer, crisp beneath each step. In summer, there might already be the smell of warm earth beginning to rise. The animals would be waiting. A horse shifting in the stable. Chickens rustling in the coop. A cow lowing softly from the barn, ready to be milked. The farm woke slowly, just as the people did. The first chores of the day were always close to the house. Water had to be drawn from the well, each bucket lifted carefully by hand. The rope would slide against the wooden frame with a dry whispering sound, and the bucket would return cool and heavy, dripping silver drops onto the ground below. Water for drinking. Water for cooking. Water for the animals. Then came the barn. The scent there was always familiar: hay, wood, warm animal breath, and the deep earthy smell of straw spread across the floor. In the half-darkness, lantern light would sway gently as the farmer moved from stall to stall, checking each animal with practiced eyes. Nothing dramatic. Nothing loud. Just the quiet work of care. A hand brushing the neck of a horse. Feed poured into a trough. Fresh hay laid down. The rhythmic sound of milk striking the inside of a pail. Slow, steady, almost musical. This was the sound of morning on an early American farm. As the sun finally rose, pale gold light would spread across the fields. Mist sometimes clung low over the land, especially in autumn, drifting like a soft blanket over rows of corn stubble or freshly turned earth. The world would seem hushed, as though even nature understood that mornings should begin gently. Breakfast was simple. Perhaps cornbread left from the night before. A bowl of porridge warm from the hearth. Fresh milk. Sometimes eggs gathered that very morning. On fortunate days, there might be butter, preserves, or slices of smoked meat. The meal was never hurried. There was little speaking, only the quiet comfort of family sharing the start of another day. A spoon against a bowl. The crackle of firewood. A chair shifting across the floorboards. Then the day's real work began. In spring, the fields called for planting. The soil had to be turned carefully, row by row, with horse and plow. The work was long and slow. Each furrow stretched ahead like a line drawn across the earth, neat and purposeful. Behind the plow, the farmer moved steadily, guiding the blade through the ground as rich dark soil rolled over in soft waves. There is something deeply peaceful in imagining this. The horse stepping forward at an unhurried pace. The leather harness creaking. The birds calling in distant trees. The smell of fresh earth rising warm into the cool morning air. Seed planting came next. Corn, wheat, beans, perhaps tobacco in some regions, all placed carefully into the ground by hand. Every seed carried hope, though no one on the farm would have spoken of it in such grand words. Hope here was practical. Quiet. Measured. Hope was rain arriving on time. Hope was no frost in late spring. Hope was healthy crops and a safe harvest. Summer brought a different rhythm. The days were longer then, and the light lingered well into the evening. Fields turned green and full, alive with rows of growing plants moving gently in the breeze. The work shifted from planting to tending. Weeds had to be pulled. Fences repaired. Animals watched. Tools sharpened. The sun could be heavy in summer. By noon, the heat often settled over the fields like a thick blanket, pressing everything into a slower pace. Even the insects seemed to hum more lazily in the warm air. Work continued, but with the measured patience of people who understood that the day was long and the land was not going anywhere. At times, clouds would gather in the afternoon. Storm clouds. Slow and dark and heavy. The farmer would glance upward, reading the sky the way others might read a book. He knew the shape of rain, the smell of it before it arrived, the feel of the wind changing direction. A summer storm could be welcome, bringing relief to thirsty crops, or worrying, threatening damage to fences and fields. Yet even storms passed. And afterward, the world seemed quieter than before. Rainwater dripping from leaves. Mud soft beneath boots. The cool scent of wet earth. A soft breeze moving through the trees. This was the slow life. A life measured not by clocks but by sunrise and sunset, by planting and harvest, by snowfall and thaw. And as this first night settles more deeply around the farmhouse, the lantern in the window still glows. Tomorrow will come gently. The farmer will rise again before dawn. The fields will wait. The animals will stir. The well rope will whisper against old wood. And the slow, peaceful rhythm of this life will continue, one quiet day flowing into the next. In the next part, this same gentle story will continue naturally into the turning of the seasons and the deeper daily life inside the farmhouse and fields. By the time the first pale line of morning reaches the eastern edge of the fields, the farm is already beginning to wake again. The night has left a cool hush over everything. Dew rests on the grass in tiny silver beads, and the fence posts, dark with dampness, stand in long quiet rows that disappear into the mist. The air is crisp and clean, carrying the scent of wet soil, wood smoke, and the faint sweetness of clover growing near the pasture. Nothing moves quickly. Even the light itself seems to arrive slowly, spreading across the land in a patient, almost careful way. Inside the farmhouse, the rooms remain dim for a few moments longer. The fire, which had been kept alive through the night beneath a bed of ash, is stirred gently back to life. A soft scraping sound comes from the hearth as the farmer kneels and shifts the coals with an iron poker. Soon, a small flame catches. It climbs slowly through the dry wood, and the room fills again with that familiar warm glow that seems to soften every corner of the house. The walls are plain wood, worn smooth by time. A simple table stands near the window, its surface marked by years of meals, bread dough, tools set down after work, and quiet evenings spent mending clothes or repairing harness straps. A few shelves hold crockery, tin cups, and jars filled with dried beans, flour, and preserved fruits from the previous harvest. Everything in the room has a purpose. Nothing is unnecessary. Yet there is a quiet beauty in that simplicity. Upstairs, the family begins to stir. Floorboards creak in slow, familiar patterns. A child's sleepy footsteps move softly across the room. A door opens with a gentle groan and closes again. The house is waking the same way it always does, not with noise, but with the small sounds of ordinary life. Soon the kitchen fills with the scent of breakfast. Perhaps it is porridge simmering in an iron pot over the fire, thick and warm, with a little milk stirred in at the end. Perhaps it is cornbread sliced from the loaf baked the evening before, toasted lightly near the hearth until its edges turn crisp. Sometimes there are eggs, still warm from the henhouse, and on especially fortunate mornings, a little butter spread across the bread, rich and golden. The meal is eaten slowly. No one rushes, because the day ahead is long, and everyone knows what it will ask of them. There is comfort in the predictability of it. The same table. The same cups. The same morning light falling through the window and landing in soft squares on the floor. Outside, the animals have already begun their own day. The chickens scratch at the ground near the coop, pecking at seeds and insects hidden in the dirt. Their quiet clucking drifts across the yard in a steady, almost soothing rhythm. In the pasture, the cows stand in the morning mist, their breath visible in the cool air. The horse, patient and calm, waits in the stable, shifting its weight now and then, the sound of its hooves against the wooden floor slow and hollow. This is the soundscape of the farm. No engines. No distant traffic. Only the natural music of a life close to the land. A rooster calling from the fence. A breeze moving through tall grass. A bucket being filled at the well. The soft thud of boots on packed earth. As the sun rises higher, the farmer steps into the fields. This time of year, the crops are beginning to grow strong. In one field, rows of corn lift themselves steadily from the soil, green leaves unfolding in quiet confidence. In another, wheat moves like soft water whenever the wind passes through it, each stalk bending gently before returning upright again. The farmer walks the rows slowly. This is not simply work. It is observation. Every plant is watched. Every change in the leaves, every sign of insects, every patch of dry soil is noticed. A farmer's eyes become trained over the years to see the smallest differences. A slight yellowing in the leaves might mean too much rain or too little. A change in the wind might suggest a storm on the way. The life of the farm depends on this kind of attention. There is a deep calm in such careful work. The hands move steadily, pulling weeds from the soil around the crops, loosening the earth where it has grown hard, straightening young plants that have leaned too far after rain. The work is repetitive, but never meaningless. Each small task protects the future harvest. By mid-morning, the warmth of the sun begins to settle over the land. The mist has lifted now, leaving the sky wide and pale blue. Birds circle lazily above the fields, and somewhere near the tree line, a dog lies in the shade, resting between bursts of alertness. The farm feels fully awake now, yet never hurried. Even labor here has a slow rhythm. The farmer moves from field to fence line. A loose board must be nailed back into place. A section of wire needs tightening. The gate hinge has begun to sag and must be lifted and adjusted. These small repairs are constant. On an early American farm, things were rarely replaced quickly. Instead, they were mended, patched, reinforced, and made useful again. Wood was precious. Iron was precious. Time itself was precious, yet it was given patiently to whatever needed attention. Toward midday, the house offers a brief return to shade. Lunch is often simple, much like breakfast. A piece of bread, perhaps a little cheese, maybe cold potatoes left from the previous evening's meal. Water drawn fresh from the well tastes cool and clear, especially after the warmth of the fields. The family gathers for only a short while before the work of the afternoon begins again. The afternoon hours stretch long and golden. This is when the farm seems to breathe most deeply. The sunlight lies warm across the pasture, and insects hum lazily in the tall grass. The air carries the smell of hay drying in the barn loft and the faint sweetness of wildflowers growing near the fence posts. Inside the barn, another kind of quiet work is taking place. Hay must be stacked carefully. Tools must be cleaned and returned to their places. Harness leather is checked for wear. A wooden handle on a hoe may need smoothing where it has splintered. The farmer's hands know these tasks so well that they move almost without thought, guided by habit built over years. And habit, on the farm, is its own kind of comfort. It is the knowledge that tomorrow will bring similar work. The fields will still need tending. The animals will still need feeding. The roof will still need watching when clouds gather. There is peace in that certainty. As the day begins to lean toward evening, the light softens. The sun lowers behind the distant trees, and the fields take on a warmer color, touched with gold and amber. Shadows stretch long across the ground, and the air cools just enough to feel pleasant against skin warmed by the day. This is often the quietest time. The major work is done. The animals are brought back toward the barn. Chickens gather near the coop, settling themselves for the night. The horse is brushed down, its coat catching the last soft light of day. Water buckets are refilled. Doors are checked and latched. The farm slowly closes itself into evening. Supper waits inside. The smell drifts out through the open window, perhaps stew simmering slowly with vegetables from the garden, or beans cooked low and long over the fire. Bread rests on the table, still faintly warm, and the room glows with lantern light as darkness begins to settle outside. After supper, the pace slows even more. There may be mending to do. A shirt sleeve repaired. A blanket edge sewn. A sack patched for future grain. Sometimes the farmer sits quietly near the fire, sharpening a blade or smoothing a wooden tool handle with a knife, small curls of pale wood falling softly to the floor. No one speaks much. Words are not always needed. The quiet itself is companion enough. Outside, night returns to the fields. Crickets begin their steady song, and the wind moves gently through the corn, making a soft rustling sound like distant whispering. The stars appear one by one above the dark silhouette of the barn roof, bright and clear in the open sky. And so another day passes. Not dramatic. Not hurried. Just slow, steady life, lived close to the earth. Tomorrow, the seasons will begin to shift a little more, and the farm will move gently toward the deeper work of harvest, where the quiet rhythm of the land continues without ever truly breaking. The days continue to move forward in their quiet, dependable way, and before long the land begins to whisper of change. At first, it is almost too subtle to notice. The mornings arrive a little cooler than before. The air that slips in through the cracks of the farmhouse window carries a sharper freshness, touched with the faint scent of drying leaves and distant wood smoke. Dew lingers longer on the grass, and the mist over the fields seems slower to lift beneath the rising sun. Summer is beginning to loosen its hold. The farmer notices this before anyone needs to say it aloud. People who live close to the land learn to read these changes with a kind of silent understanding. It is there in the way the wind moves differently through the corn. It is there in the birds gathering in the trees at dusk. It is there in the softer angle of sunlight falling across the porch in the late afternoon. Autumn is approaching. And with it comes one of the most important times in the life of the farm. Harvest. Yet even this season of greatest importance does not arrive with excitement. It comes quietly, steadily, as all things do here. The fields themselves seem to signal it first. The tall green corn begins to fade into shades of gold and pale brown. Wheat heads bend heavily, ready at last. The vegetable garden near the house offers its final fullness, squash resting thick on the vine, beans hanging in soft green clusters, potatoes waiting beneath the soil. The farm feels full. There is a sense of gentle abundance in the air, as though the earth has spent all these months slowly preparing this moment. The mornings begin earlier now. Before dawn, the house stirs in darkness. The fire is coaxed back to life, and its orange glow spills across the room in slow-moving shadows. Breakfast is simple but hearty, meant to carry everyone through the long day ahead. Bread, porridge, milk, perhaps eggs, all eaten in the quiet way that has become the rhythm of the household. Outside, the stars are still visible when the first steps cross the yard. Boots press softly into the cool earth. The grass is damp. The air smells of hay and cold mist. There is something deeply peaceful about this hour, when the world feels suspended between night and morning. Soon the work begins. In the fields, the corn stands tall and dry, its leaves rustling softly in the breeze like old paper. One by one, the ears are gathered by hand. The movement is repetitive, almost meditative. Reach, twist, pull. Reach, twist, pull. The sound is gentle. A dry crack as the ear comes free. The soft thud as it lands in the basket. The whisper of leaves brushing against sleeves and hands. Hours pass in this slow rhythm. The farmer moves steadily down the rows, not rushing, because rushing serves no purpose. The work must be done carefully. Every ear matters. Every basket represents food for the coming winter, seed for next spring, feed for the animals. This is the season when the farm prepares for colder days. Nearby, other tasks continue. The wheat must be cut and gathered. Bundles are tied and leaned together in small standing groups across the field, their shapes catching the golden light of morning. Seen from a distance, they almost resemble quiet figures resting in the land. The scent of harvest is unlike any other. Dry stalks. Fresh cut hay. Dust warmed by sunlight. The rich, earthy smell of root vegetables lifted from the ground. It is a scent of work completed slowly over months. By midday, the sun sits higher, though its warmth is gentler now than it was in summer. A cool breeze moves across the open land, carrying the faint sound of leaves beginning to stir in the trees along the edge of the property. Lunch is taken in the shade when possible. Perhaps beneath a tree. Perhaps sitting on an overturned crate near the barn. Bread wrapped in cloth. A few apples. Cold potatoes. Water cool from the well. The meal is quiet and practical, but there is a quiet satisfaction in it. Food tastes different after hours of labor in the field. Simpler, perhaps, but somehow more complete. After the short rest, the afternoon work continues. The wagon is brought out. Its wooden wheels roll slowly over the uneven ground, creaking with each turn. The horse pulls patiently, its breath visible in the slightly cooler air. Baskets of corn and bundles of wheat are loaded carefully, then carried back toward the barn where they will be stored safely. Inside the barn, the atmosphere is dim and calm. Dust floats in thin shafts of sunlight that slip through the wooden slats. The smell of hay is thick and comforting. Here, the gathered harvest begins its slow transition from field to storage. Corn is stacked. Wheat is arranged. Vegetables are sorted. Pumpkins and squash are lined along the wall. Potatoes are placed in bins. Everything has its place. Nothing is wasted. This careful storing is as important as the harvesting itself. The coming winter depends on it. As afternoon fades toward evening, the farm takes on a deep golden color. The fields glow softly beneath the lowering sun. The sky begins to pale into gentle shades of amber and blue. In the distance, smoke rises from the chimney of the farmhouse in a thin quiet line. The day's work is not yet finished. Animals still need tending. The cow is milked again. Fresh hay is laid in the stalls. Water troughs are filled. The chickens are gathered safely into the coop before darkness settles. These tasks are so familiar now that they feel almost like part of the land's own breathing. Day after day. Season after season. The same motions repeated, never in exactly the same way, yet always with the same quiet purpose. Inside the farmhouse, evening arrives softly. The warmth of the hearth greets everyone as they return from the fields. Boots are left by the door. Hands are washed in cool water from the basin. Jackets and shawls are hung on pegs near the wall. Supper is richer during harvest season. A thick stew, perhaps, made with potatoes, beans, onions, and whatever vegetables the garden has offered. Fresh bread rests at the center of the table. Apples, newly gathered, bring a sweet scent to the room. The lantern light is warm. Faces look softer in it. The long work of the day begins to settle into the quiet comfort of night. After the meal, the family often remains near the fire. Someone may be peeling apples for drying. Someone else may be mending clothes. The farmer might sit in silence, slowly cleaning a tool blade with an oiled cloth, preparing it for tomorrow. Outside, the sounds of autumn night begin. Crickets sing. The wind moves through dry corn stalks left standing in the far field. Leaves rustle softly along the tree line. The air grows colder. There is a stillness now that feels deeper than summer's quiet. It is the stillness of a season drawing inward. And yet there is comfort in it. The farm is prepared. The fields have given what they could. The barn is fuller now. The pantry shelves inside the house begin to fill with jars, sacks, and bundles that will carry the family through the long winter months ahead. This is how life continues here. Not through grand moments, but through steady preparation. Through hands working patiently. Through days that resemble one another. Through quiet trust in the turning of the seasons. Tonight, as the fire burns low and the wind brushes softly against the side of the house, the farm rests again. But the season is still changing. Soon colder mornings will arrive. Frost will gather on the fields. And the slow life of the early American farmer will move gently into winter, where the quiet becomes even deeper and the days even slower. By the time autumn settles fully over the land, the farm has taken on a quieter kind of beauty. The fields that once shimmered with summer green now rest in muted shades of gold, brown, and faded amber. Stubble remains where the wheat was cut, and the corn rows, once tall and full, stand in shorter dry lines that rustle softly whenever the wind passes through. Fallen leaves gather along the fence posts and around the porch steps, moving in slow little circles before coming to rest. The mornings are colder now. When the farmer opens the front door before dawn, the air touches his face with a crisp sharpness that wakes the body fully. His breath rises in pale clouds, drifting upward in the darkness. The grass beneath his boots is stiff with frost, each blade coated in a fine white layer that glimmers faintly in the starlight. The farm feels hushed. Even the animals seem slower at this hour. Inside the stable, the horse shifts gently in its stall, warm breath filling the cool space with soft clouds of steam. The cow turns its head as the lantern light moves across the barn, and the chickens remain tucked quietly together, not yet ready for the day. This is the beginning of winter's approach. And with it, life on the farm begins to move inward. The fields no longer demand the same long hours of labor they did in spring and summer. Much of the harvest has been brought in, stacked safely in the barn or stored inside the house. Now the work changes. There is always work. But now it is closer to home. After the morning chores are finished and the animals fed, the farmer often turns his attention to the tasks that winter makes necessary. Firewood must be gathered, split, and stacked high beside the house. This is work that cannot be neglected. The warmth of the family depends on it. The sound of the axe becomes one of the steady sounds of the season. Lift. Pause. Then the clean, solid crack of wood splitting apart. It echoes across the cold morning air and fades into the stillness of the fields. Again and again the motion repeats. The farmer's hands, already worn by the months behind him, move with practiced ease. Each log is carried and stacked neatly beneath the small overhang near the porch, where it will stay as dry as possible against rain or snow. The smell of fresh cut wood fills the yard. It is sharp and clean and somehow comforting. Inside the farmhouse, the days begin to feel more enclosed. The windows are often shut now against the cold, and the warmth of the fire becomes the center of the home. Much of life gathers around it. Meals are prepared there. Clothes are dried nearby after damp mornings. In the evenings, chairs are drawn closer to its glow. The fire is never far from attention. Someone is always adding another log, adjusting the iron grate, stirring the coals. Its crackling becomes a constant presence, soft and steady, like a quiet voice in the room. The pantry shelves are fuller now. Sacks of grain sit neatly against the wall. Dried herbs hang from hooks overhead, filling the room with faint earthy scents. Apples stored in baskets bring a sweet cool fragrance to the air. Jars of preserves, carefully prepared during late summer and autumn, line the shelves in neat rows. Nothing here is accidental. Every jar, every sack, every bundle represents careful work done months before. This is how the slow life of the farm moves through time. One season always preparing for the next. In the afternoons, the farmer often repairs what the busy months left worn. A fence rail weakened by summer storms. A wagon wheel that has begun to loosen. A shovel handle smoothed and reinforced. The barn door hinge that groans more than it should. These are quiet tasks, done without urgency, yet always with purpose. Sometimes he works in the barn, where the cold is kept away just enough by the presence of hay and animals. The barn in winter feels almost like its own world. The air is dry and filled with the warm scent of straw. Dust hangs in thin beams of pale light that slip through the cracks in the walls. The animals seem calmer this time of year. The horse spends more time resting in its stall. The cows stand quietly, chewing in slow steady rhythm. The chickens move about the coop with soft rustling sounds, pecking at feed scattered across the ground. Their presence brings a sense of life to the stillness outside. Because outside, the land grows quieter each day. The trees are nearly bare now. Their branches stretch dark against the pale sky. The fields lie open and empty, their work finished for the year. When the wind moves across them, it carries a dry whispering sound over the stubble and fallen leaves. There is a peaceful emptiness to it. Nothing much happens. And yet everything feels deeply alive in its own slow way. Toward evening, the cold becomes more noticeable. The sun sets earlier now, slipping below the horizon while there is still work left to do. Lanterns are lit sooner, casting soft golden circles of light against the growing darkness. Supper in this season feels especially comforting. The meals are warm and filling. Stew simmered for hours. Bread thick and dense. Beans cooked slowly. Potatoes roasted near the fire. Sometimes the scent of apples and cinnamon fills the room if something sweet has been prepared from the last of the autumn harvest. The family gathers close. Conversation, when it comes, is soft and unhurried. But often the silence itself is the greater comfort. A spoon against a bowl. The crackle of the fire. The quiet shifting of chairs. The sound of wind brushing against the outside walls. After supper, the evenings lengthen. These long evenings are among the calmest moments of farm life. There is time now for slower indoor work. Clothes are mended by firelight. Corn is shelled by hand into waiting bowls. Rope is braided or repaired. Tools are cleaned and sharpened for spring, even though spring still feels very far away. The farmer may sit near the hearth with a piece of wood in his hands, slowly carving a new handle for a tool or smoothing a rough board for some future repair. These are not tasks done in haste. Each movement is measured. Each sound softened by the warmth of the room. Outside, the night grows colder. The stars seem brighter in the clear autumn sky, sharp and steady above the dark outline of the barn roof. Sometimes an owl calls from the distant trees. Sometimes only the wind can be heard, moving through the bare branches with a long gentle sigh. And little by little, autumn begins to give way. One morning, the frost remains longer than usual. Another morning, the water at the edge of the bucket carries a thin sheet of ice. Then comes the first snowfall. It begins quietly. Small flakes drifting down through the gray morning light. At first they melt as they touch the ground. Then more follow. And slowly the fields, the fences, the porch roof, and the branches of the trees are covered in soft white stillness. The whole farm seems to exhale. Sound becomes softer. Footsteps are muffled. The wind itself seems quieter. Winter has arrived. And with it, the life of the farm becomes slower still, wrapped in warmth indoors and deep silence beyond the walls of the house. In the next part, the story will continue into the long peaceful winter days, where the farm rests beneath snow and life moves in its gentlest rhythm of all. Winter settles over the farm with a softness that feels almost unreal. By morning, the land has changed completely. Where the fields once lay open in shades of brown and gold, there is now a wide unbroken blanket of white stretching quietly to the tree line. The fence posts rise from the snow like dark markers, evenly spaced and still. The barn roof carries a thick layer of powder, and the branches of the old trees near the house bend gently beneath the weight of it. The world seems quieter than ever. Snow has a way of taking sound and holding it close. The usual creak of the yard gate is softened. Footsteps no longer strike the earth with a dull thud but sink with a muted, cushioned sound. Even the wind seems to move more gently over the fields. Inside the farmhouse, the contrast is comforting. The fire in the hearth burns steadily, filling the room with a deep orange glow. Warmth gathers in the center of the house, and everyone naturally moves closer to it. The windows are edged with delicate frost patterns, fine white lines that spread across the glass like tiny branches. Morning begins as it always does, though the darkness lasts longer now. The farmer rises before the sun, but winter mornings make it feel as though night has not yet ended. The room is cool beyond the reach of the hearth's warmth, and the floorboards carry a chill beneath bare feet and wool socks. The first task is always the fire. A fresh log is placed on the coals. There is the soft crackle of bark catching flame. Then the slow deepening glow as warmth begins to spread again. Breakfast on winter mornings feels especially welcome. Porridge thick and steaming. Bread warmed near the fire. Milk, cool and fresh. Perhaps a little honey or preserves saved from warmer months. The smell fills the room, rich and gentle, blending with wood smoke and the faint earthy scent of drying herbs hanging overhead. Outside, the chores must still be done. Snow changes many things, but it does not stop the farm from asking for care. The farmer pulls on heavy boots, thick wool layers, and a coat worn smooth from years of winters. A scarf is wrapped close at the neck, and gloves pulled tight over hands already rough from long work. The moment the door opens, the cold air enters sharply. It is clean and bright and deeply still. The yard is marked only by yesterday's footprints, half covered now by fresh snow. The walk to the barn feels longer in winter. Each step presses deep into the white ground. The sound is slow and soft. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. A lantern glows in the dim morning, its light reflected faintly off the snow. Inside the barn, there is immediate relief from the cold wind. The air is warmer here, filled with the scent of hay, straw, and animal breath. The horse turns its head at the sound of the door, and the cows shift gently in their stalls. Winter makes the animals feel even more like quiet companions. Their warmth fills the space. Their slow movements seem to match the season. Hay is brought down from the loft in generous armfuls. Feed is measured carefully. Water must be checked, because in the coldest weather, the surface may freeze overnight. The farmer moves slowly from stall to stall, making sure each animal is comfortable. These routines are never skipped. Not in snow. Not in rain. Not in bitter cold. The farm depends on constancy. Once the animals are tended, the rest of the day begins to unfold in its winter rhythm. Unlike the busy months of planting and harvest, winter offers longer stretches indoors. The fields rest now beneath snow and frost. There is no plowing to do, no seeds to sow, no rows to weed. And yet the days are never empty. Inside the farmhouse, winter work has its own quiet pace. Corn gathered in autumn may now be shelled by hand. The dry kernels fall into bowls with a soft, steady tapping sound. Beans are sorted and prepared. Clothes are mended carefully by firelight. Wool socks are darned. Blankets are repaired. Shirts worn thin at the elbow are strengthened with neat patches. These small acts of care are part of the farm's life as much as any field work. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is thrown aside if it can still be used. Sometimes the farmer turns to tools. Winter is the season of maintenance. A plow blade is cleaned and sharpened. A wooden handle is replaced. Leather straps are oiled and softened so they will be ready when spring returns. Sitting near the hearth, he works patiently, the sound of metal against stone or cloth against iron blending into the calm of the room. Outside the window, snow continues to fall now and then. Sometimes it comes in slow drifting flakes that seem to float without urgency. Sometimes it arrives in thicker waves, blurring the line between earth and sky until everything beyond the porch disappears into pale gray silence. On such days, the farm feels wrapped in stillness. The family remains close to the fire. Meals become the natural markers of time. Morning porridge. Midday bread and stew. Evening potatoes and beans. The smell of simmering food fills the house for hours, slow and comforting. In the late afternoon, when the light begins to fade, the room grows even cozier. Lanterns are lit early now. Their warm glow pools gently across the wooden table and walls. Outside, darkness gathers quickly. The sky in winter evenings often turns a deep, quiet blue before surrendering fully to night. This is perhaps the calmest part of the entire year. There are long moments when nothing happens at all. Only the fire crackling. Only the wind brushing against the shutters. Only the slow breathing of a house settled into warmth. Sometimes the farmer sits in silence, looking out the frosted window at the snow-covered fields. Even at rest, the mind remains with the land. There is thought for spring. For the seeds stored carefully in sacks. For the fields that sleep beneath the snow. For the repairs still to be finished before thaw. The farm is never far from thought. But winter invites patience. It teaches waiting. The earth itself seems to be resting, gathering strength in quiet darkness for the season yet to come. At night, the cold deepens. The fire is banked carefully before sleep, the coals arranged so that warmth will remain until morning. Heavy blankets are pulled close. Upstairs, the house settles into silence. Outside, the snow reflects the moonlight. The fields glow faintly beneath the stars. Fence lines cut soft dark shapes across the white land. The barn stands still and watchful in the distance. Nothing much happens. And that is the beauty of it. The slow life of the early American farmer is not made of grand events. It is made of mornings like these. Snow underfoot. Warmth by the fire. Hands busy with small tasks. A life carried gently from one day into the next. And while winter still holds the land in its quiet embrace, somewhere deep beneath the frozen ground, the promise of spring waits patiently, ready to return when the world has rested enough. In the next part, the story will continue into the late winter thaw, where the first signs of spring begin to touch the farm once more. Late winter lingers over the farm in a way that feels both quiet and patient, as though the land itself is not yet ready to wake. For many days, everything appears unchanged. The fields remain covered in snow, though the bright white of early winter has softened into a more weathered stillness. Along the fence lines and around the base of the barn, the snow is packed firm, marked by many careful footsteps. The roof of the farmhouse still carries a pale layer, and the bare trees stand dark and motionless against the gray morning sky. And yet, little by little, something begins to shift. The farmer notices it first in the light. Morning comes slightly earlier now. The darkness no longer lingers quite so long before dawn. A faint silver glow reaches the eastern horizon sooner than it did in the heart of winter, and when it does, it stays a little longer each day. The sun feels different too. Still cool. Still gentle. But a little stronger. A little warmer on the porch boards by midday. A little brighter across the snow-covered fields. These are the first quiet signs that the season is turning. Inside the farmhouse, life continues in its steady rhythm. The fire still burns each morning, and the room still gathers around its warmth. Breakfast remains simple and comforting: warm porridge, bread, perhaps a bit of preserved fruit from autumn. The scent of wood smoke remains part of every room, woven into the walls, the blankets, the clothes hanging near the hearth. But there is a subtle change in mood. The house feels as though it is waiting. Not with excitement. Only with calm expectation. The same feeling rests over the barn and fields. Outside, the air carries a slightly different smell. Less sharp than before. The cold still bites, especially before sunrise, but beneath it there is now the faint scent of damp earth hidden under snow and ice. This scent is small and easy to miss. But to someone who lives by the seasons, it means everything. It means thaw. It means movement. It means spring is somewhere ahead, even if it still feels far away. The chores remain much the same. Each morning the farmer crosses the yard to the barn, boots sinking into the older snow with slow familiar steps. The lantern is needed less often now as the dawn light begins to arrive sooner. Inside the stable, the animals too seem to sense the change. The horse is more alert in the mornings. The cows shift with quiet restlessness. Even the chickens begin to stir earlier, their soft clucking starting before the full light of day. The barn is still warm with the scent of hay and straw. Feed is measured carefully. Water is checked. Fresh bedding is spread. These routines continue with the same steady patience as always. The farm depends on repetition. On care repeated day after day. Nothing hurried. Nothing forgotten. By afternoon, the edges of the yard begin to change. Near the porch steps, where the sunlight lingers longest, small patches of snow begin to thin. The wood of the steps appears again in narrow damp strips. Water drips softly from the eaves of the roof, each drop landing with a quiet tap against the ground below. This sound becomes one of the music of late winter. Drip. Pause. Drip. A slow rhythm that carries through the stillness. The farmer pauses sometimes to listen. Because this too is part of the land speaking. The frozen world is beginning to loosen. Inside the barn, winter work slowly gives way to preparation. The tools repaired during the cold months are brought out again for inspection. The plow is checked once more. Leather straps are tightened. Wooden handles are smoothed with the palm of a hand, feeling for rough places. There is comfort in this quiet readiness. Spring does not arrive all at once. It is invited slowly, through preparation. One tool at a time. One field at a time. One day at a time. Some afternoons, when the sky clears and the sun shines a little more warmly, the farmer walks the edges of the fields. The snow is still deep in places, but near the southern edges where sunlight reaches most directly, the first dark lines of soil begin to show through. They are small, easy to overlook, but deeply meaningful. Dark earth against white snow. The first glimpse of the ground after many months. The fields still sleep, yet they are beginning to stir. The trees also begin to change. Their branches remain bare, but in the softer light of afternoon, tiny buds can be seen at the tips if one looks closely enough. Small, tight, and quiet, they hold the promise of leaves yet to come. The air itself seems fuller. Birdsong, absent for so much of winter, begins to return in small gentle ways. A single bird in the morning. Another by the barn at dusk. Their sounds are delicate and scattered, but they bring a sense of life back to the stillness. Inside the house, the long evenings remain peaceful. Lantern light glows against the wooden walls. The fire still provides the center of comfort. Supper remains warm and slow. Stews. Beans. Bread. Potatoes. Food that asks for patience in its making and offers warmth in return. After the meal, the family often remains close to the hearth. Hands busy with simple work. Mending. Sorting seeds. Checking the small cloth sacks where next season's planting corn and beans have been stored. This is one of the quietest and most hopeful tasks of late winter. Seeds saved from last year's harvest are carefully examined. Each one carries the future within it. The farmer turns them through his fingers slowly, not with grand thoughts, but with the deep practical understanding that life on the farm begins here. A handful of seeds. A stretch of waiting earth. A season's worth of patience. Outside, the thaw continues little by little. Some mornings the ground refreezes in the cold before dawn, leaving a thin glassy layer of ice over puddles in the yard. By afternoon, the sun softens it again. This cycle repeats day after day. Freeze. Thaw. Freeze. Thaw. The farm exists between seasons now. Not winter. Not yet spring. A quiet in-between time. There is something deeply peaceful about this stage. Nothing dramatic happens. Only slow change. Only the patient turning of the year. One evening, as the farmer steps outside after supper, the sky is clear and white above the snow-covered fields. The stars shine softly, and the moonlight reflects across the white ground in a pale silver glow. But there is something different in the air. The wind is softer. The cold less severe. And from somewhere near the distant tree line comes the faint sound of moving water. A stream beginning to run again beneath the melting ice. It is a small sound. Almost hidden by distance. Yet it feels like the first whisper of spring. The land is waking. Slowly. Gently. Without hurry. And soon, the the fields that have rested beneath snow and frost will be ready once more for the steady hands of the farmer, the turning plow, and the beginning of another quiet year. In the next part, the story will continue into early spring, where the farm awakens fully and the first planting begins again. Early spring does not arrive all at once. It comes in pieces. Small changes scattered across quiet days, so gentle that they can almost be missed if one is not paying attention. But on the farm, attention is always present. It is part of living here. It is part of listening to the land. One morning, the farmer opens the door and notices that the air no longer feels sharp against the skin. It is still cool, still carrying the memory of winter, but it has softened in a way that feels almost kind. The snow in the yard is thinner now, uneven, broken into wet patches and icy crusts that reflect the morning light. The sound of water is more present. Not loud. Not rushing. Just steady. Dripping from the roof. Running beneath melting snow. Gathering in small channels along the edges of the fields. The farm is changing again. Inside the farmhouse, the fire still burns each morning, but it is no longer the only source of warmth that matters. The sun now rises earlier, and its light reaches into the rooms with a brighter, clearer presence. The windows, once covered in frost patterns, begin to show plain glass again. Breakfast feels slightly different too. Still simple. Still steady. But lighter in feeling. Bread, porridge, maybe dried apples softened in warm water. The taste of stored winter food slowly gives way to the anticipation of fresh growth. The seeds stored through winter are brought out again. Carefully. Quietly. Laid across the table in small cloth bundles and wooden bowls. Corn. Beans. Wheat. Each one sorted with patience, checked once more before the soil receives them. There is no rush in this preparation. Even spring does not demand haste. It only asks for readiness. Outside, the land continues to shift. The snow retreats slowly from the open fields, pulling back like a quiet tide. In its place, the ground appears darker, heavy with moisture. The earth smells different now. Richer. Deeper. Almost alive beneath the surface. The farmer walks the edges of the fields again. Boots sink into softened ground instead of frozen crust. The sound beneath each step is no longer sharp. It is soft. Weighted. Real. The plow is brought out more often now. Not yet for full planting, but for preparation. The soil must be turned gently where it has compacted over winter. Stones are cleared. Old roots are removed. Lines are marked for future rows. The horse returns to field work slowly. It has rested through the cold months, and now it moves with calm strength, pulling the plow across the darkening earth. The sound of iron against soil returns to the land after its long silence. Scrape. Turn. Flow. The rhythm is steady and patient. Behind the plow, the earth opens in long quiet lines, ready to receive what will come next. Birds are more present now. They return in small groups at first, then in larger ones. Their calls fill the mornings with scattered music. Some land near the freshly turned soil, searching for insects revealed by the plow. Their presence feels like a gentle confirmation. The land is waking. Not just the farm, but everything around it. The trees show more life each day. Tiny green buds begin to push outward from branches that had looked lifeless only weeks before. At first they are barely visible, small hints of color against brown wood. But they grow steadily with each passing day. The wind carries a different feeling now. Less heavy. More open. It moves through the fields without the weight of winter behind it. Rain comes more often in spring. Not harsh storms, but soft steady showers that fall across the land like a slow blessing. The sound of rain on the farmhouse roof becomes a familiar comfort again, just as it was in earlier seasons. Drumming gently. Then fading. Then returning. Inside the barn, preparations continue. Tools are sharpened once more. Buckets are repaired. Harnesses checked. Everything is made ready for the long work of planting. The barn feels different in spring light. Brighter. Less enclosed. Dust floats in white golden beams that enter through open doors and cracks in the wood. The animals are also more active. The cows move with a little more energy. The chickens scatter farther into the yard during the day. The horse stands at the gate sometimes, as if waiting for the fields. There is a sense of anticipation everywhere. Not spoken. Not named. Just felt. Even the house reflects the change in season. Windows are opened during the warmer hours. Fresh air moves through the rooms, carrying the scent of damp earth and new grass beginning to grow along the edges of paths. Clothes are lighter now. Layers slowly removed as the days warm. Even the fire in the hearth becomes smaller, needed less for heat and more for comfort than necessity. By mid-spring, the land is ready. The soil is soft and dark, easy to work. The frost is gone from the ground. The fields no longer feel asleep. They feel prepared. Planting begins. Early in the morning, before the sun has fully risen, the farmer and horse move together into the fields again. The wagon carries seed and tools, and the work begins in the same slow steady rhythm as before. But now the purpose feels different. This is not harvest. This is beginning. Rows are marked carefully. Seeds are dropped into the earth with practiced hands. Covering soil is drawn gently over them. Each action is repeated thousands of times, yet never feels meaningless. Because each seed carries the possibility of food, of survival, of another year continuing forward. The sound of planting is quiet. Soft footsteps. The rustle of soil. Occasional bird calls in the distance. And the steady breathing of the horse moving forward through the field. As the day progresses, the sun grows warmer. Light spreads across the fields with a softness that feels new after the long winter. Shadows shorten. Colors deepen. The world seems to expand again. By afternoon, the work slows slightly. Not because it is finished, but because the pace of spring itself encourages steadiness. There is no need to hurry. Everything grows in its own time. The farmer pauses occasionally, looking across the newly planted rows. They are simple lines in the earth. Barely noticeable at first glance. But they represent something larger. A cycle continuing. A life repeating. A quiet agreement between land and people. Evening arrives with longer light now. The sun stays above the horizon later, casting warm gold across the fields as it begins to set. The sky holds soft colors, pale orange, gentle pink, and fading blue blending together without sharp edges. The farm feels peaceful in this light. The work of the day is done. Animals return to their resting places. The house fills again with the smell of supper. And as night approaches, the land settles into a calm that feels different from winter's silence. This is not stillness born of cold. It is stillness born of renewal. The seeds rest now beneath the soil. The fields wait. The trees grow slowly greener. And the farm, once quiet under snow, now breathes again with the steady promise of life returning in full. In the next part, the story will continue into late spring and early summer, where growth becomes visible and the farm begins its long gentle journey toward another harvest. Late spring arrives without ceremony. There is no single morning when everything suddenly feels different. Instead, it is a slow unfolding, as if the land is remembering how to grow again, one small detail at a time. The fields that were once dark and newly planted now show the first soft green lines of life. At first, they are faint, so faint they almost seem like a trick of the light when the sun is low. But by walking closer, the change becomes clear. Tiny shoots push through the soil, thin and delicate, yet steady in their quiet determination. The farm begins to feel alive again. Not loudly. Not suddenly. But steadily, like breathing. Morning on the farm now carries a gentler warmth. The air is no longer cold enough to bite the skin, though it still holds a cool freshness before sunrise. Dew forms again on grass and leaves, but now it sparkles under a brighter sky, melting away sooner as the day grows. The farmer rises early as always. Old habits do not change with the seasons. The fire is still lit in the hearth, though it no longer fights deep winter cold. Its purpose now is comfort more than necessity. The glow fills the kitchen softly as breakfast is prepared, simple food that feels lighter than winter meals. Bread, fresh and slightly overheat. Milk. Eggs. Sometimes early greens gathered from the garden's edge. Outside, the work continues. But now it is different work. The planted fields require care rather than preparation. Rows must be checked. Soil must be observed. Young plants must be protected from weeds that grow quickly in spring's warmth. The farmer walks slowly between the lines of green, careful not to step too close to tender shoots. Each plant is small, but each one matters. The future harvest depends on this stage more than any other. Weeding becomes a constant task. A quiet, repetitive motion. Kneel. Pull. Clear. Move forward. Again and again. The sound of the field is soft wind moving through young plants, birds calling from the fence posts, the faint rustle of insects returning to the warming earth. The horse works less now than in planting season, but it still helps with lighter tasks, pulling small loads, carrying tools, moving supplies between barn and field. Its movements are calmer in the warmth, its breath no longer visible in the air. The barn itself feels lighter too. Doors are left open longer during the day. Sunlight pours in more freely, illuminating dust that floats in slow golden streams. The scent of hay mixes with fresh spring air drifting in from outside. Inside the farmhouse, life adjusts with the season. Windows remain open more often. Curtains move gently with the breeze. The sound of the world outside becomes part of the room again, the distant calls of birds, the soft creak of wooden fences, the occasional lowing of cattle from the pasture. Meals shift with the season's offerings. Stored food slowly gives way to fresh growth. Early vegetables from the garden appear on the table. Greens, young and tender. Radishes pulled from soft soil. Fresh herbs adding scent to simple dishes. There is a quiet satisfaction in eating food that has just come from the ground outside the door. By midday, the farm is fully awake. The sun is higher now, and its warmth spreads across the fields evenly. The sky is wide and clear most days, interrupted only by slow-moving clouds that cast soft shadows over the land. Work continues in steady rhythm. Fence lines are checked again, as spring winds can loosen what winter weakened. Tools are carried from place to place. Small repairs are made where needed. Nothing urgent, but everything important in its own quiet way. And through it all, the fields continue to grow. The young crops rise a little higher each day. What was once barely visible green now forms soft rows that ripple gently in the wind. The farm begins to take on its familiar shape again, the shape of a place in motion, but never in haste. Afternoons sometimes bring brief rain. Warm spring rain falls in gentle sheets, not heavy enough to stop work, but soft enough to pause it naturally. The sound of it on the roof is steady and calming, filling the house with a quiet rhythm. Drip against wood. Shush against leaves. Run off along the ground. After rain, the smell of the land changes again. Earth becomes rich and deep. Plants seem brighter, as if they have been refreshed. Even the air feels cleaner. Evenings in late spring are some of the most peaceful of the year. The sun lingers longer now, stretching light across the fields in soft gold. Shadows grow slowly. The sky holds color for a while before fading into blue, then into night. Work slows naturally. Animals return on their own to familiar places. Chickens gather without prompting. The horse stands quietly near the barn. Cows move toward the stable with patient steps. Inside the house, supper is calm and unhurried. The family sits together as the day releases its weight. There is no rush to finish. No urgency left behind. Only the steady comfort of routine. Afterward, the evening stretches gently. Sometimes there is small work left, repairing a tool, mending cloth, sorting seeds saved for future planting. But often, there is simply quiet. Sitting near the fire. Listening to the soft sounds of night returning. Outside, the fields are no longer empty. They are filled with growing life. Young crops moving slightly in the breeze. Insects beginning their evening hum. Birds settling into trees for rest. The farm feels different now than it did in winter. It is no longer a place of waiting. It is a place of becoming. Each day adds something small but real. A little more height in the corn. A little more strength in the wheat. A little more green across the land. And though nothing dramatic ever happens, everything important is happening all the time. The slow life continues. Not as repetition alone, but as quiet progress. And as night falls gently over the farm once more, the world settles into its calm rhythm again, ready for another day, another small change, another step forward in the long, peaceful cycle of the land. In the next part, the story will continue into early summer, where growth becomes fuller, the fields deepen in color, and the farm enters its most abundant and steady season. Early summer arrives in a way that feels almost seamless, as if spring simply deepens into it without drawing attention. One morning, the air is no longer just cool and fresh. It carries warmth that stays even after sunrise. The fields, once pale with new growth, now hold a richer green, fuller, denser, more confident. The young crops no longer look delicate. They have begun to stand with quiet strength, shaped by rain, sun, and time. The farm feels settled into its growing season. Everything is in motion now, but still in a calm and steady way. The mornings begin earlier with light that is stronger and more present. The sun rises clean and bright over the fields, casting long soft shadows that quickly shorten as the day moves forward. Dew still forms overnight, but it disappears quickly under the growing warmth. Inside the farmhouse, the fire is no longer central to comfort. It is used lightly now, mostly in the early morning before the day fully warms. Windows stay open longer. Fresh air moves freely through the rooms, carrying the scent of grass, soil, and distant trees. Breakfast feels lighter again. Fresh eggs. Bread that no longer needs warming by the fire. Milk, cool and simple. Sometimes fruit begins to appear early, berries gathered from the edges of fields or nearby woods. There is a quiet satisfaction in this shift. The land is producing again. Outside, the fields have changed fully from early spring to summer green. Rows of corn stand taller now, their leaves broad and rustling softly whenever the wind passes through. Wheat grows thicker, its color deepening toward gold even while still young. The garden near the house is full and active, plants spreading outward, climbing supports, filling the air with the scent of living growth. The farmer walks these fields each morning. Not quickly. Not aimlessly. But with the steady attention that has always guided this life. Weeds still appear, but less frequently now in some places where crops have grown strong enough to shade the soil. Where needed, they are removed carefully, hands moving through the green without disturbing what is meant to remain. There is less preparation now. More maintenance. More watching. More quiet adjustment. The farm, in early summer, feels like something breathing deeply and evenly. The animals move differently too. They spend more time outdoors. The horse stands in the shade near the barn during the warmer hours, occasionally flicking its tail at insects that drift through the air. Cows graze steadily in the pasture, moving slowly from one patch of grass to another without urgency. Chickens scatter widely across the yard, pecking and scratching, their movements scattered but peaceful. The sounds of the farm are fuller now. Insects hum continuously in the grass. Birds call from trees that are now fully leafed out. Wind moves through fields in long visible waves. Even silence feels different in summer, it is less empty, more alive. By midday, the heat grows stronger. Not harsh in the way of late summer, but steady and present. Work slows slightly during the hottest part of the day, as it has always done. The farmer often pauses in the shade of trees or near the barn, drinking cool water drawn from the well. The well itself becomes more important in summer. Its water remains cold even when the air grows warm. The rope and bucket move in a slow, familiar rhythm. Lift. Lower. Draw. Pour. This simple motion becomes a small comfort in the heat of the day. Afternoons are filled with continued care of the land. Fields are checked for growth patterns. Fences are inspected again, as summer storms can arrive suddenly and strongly. Repairs are made where wind or weather has weakened wood or wire. Tools are carried from place to place, always in use but never rushed. There is a sense of stability now. The foundation work of the year is complete. The planting is done. The growth is underway. What remains is patience and observation. The garden near the house becomes a central part of daily life in summer. It is smaller than the fields, but more immediate. Here, food is gathered often and in small amounts. Tomatoes begin to ripen slowly, changing from green to deep red under the sun. Beans hang in clusters, ready to be picked. Herbs grow thick and fragrant, filling the air when brushed by hand. The farmer's family moves through this space often during the day, collecting what is needed for meals. There is a quiet pleasure in this closeness to food. Nothing feels distant. Everything is immediate. Everything is connected. Evenings in early summer are long and gentle. The sun takes its time setting, casting warm golden light across the entire farm. Shadows stretch slowly but never feel heavy. The sky holds color for a long time, soft oranges, pale pinks, fading blues that melt into night without sharp boundaries. Work naturally slows toward the end of the day. Animals return on their own. The barn doors are closed with easy familiarity. Water troughs are filled for the night. Chickens settle into their coop as darkness approaches. Inside the farmhouse, supper feels abundant in a quiet way. Fresh vegetables. Simple cooked meals. Bread made earlier in the day. The scent of herbs and warm food fills the room gently, mixing with the familiar smell of wood and earth. After eating, the evening opens into stillness. There is often no need for further work. So people sit near the open windows, near the soft glow of lantern light, near the fading warmth of the day. Outside, the farm continues its quiet life without pause. Grass moves in the wind. Trees shift slowly. Night insects begin their steady song. The sky deepens into dark blue, then black, then fills with stars that appear one by one above the fields. The farm, now fully in summer, feels complete in its season. Not finished. Not ending. But fully present. Everything growing. Everything steady. Everything quietly in motion. And as the night settles gently over the land, the fields continue their slow transformation toward the fullness of summer, where growth reaches its peak and the cycle of waiting begins again to turn toward harvest. By midsummer, the farm feels full in a way that is hard to describe with anything other than quiet presence. The fields are no longer just growing. They are thriving. Corn stands tall now, reaching upward with broad green leaves that rustle like soft fabric whenever the wind moves through them. The wheat has thickened, its heads beginning to form with a subtle heaviness that hints at the coming harvest. The garden near the house has become a small world of its own, dense, layered, and alive with steady production. Everything has reached a kind of balance. Not stillness, but steady motion. The mornings begin warm now, even before the sun fully rises. The air carries a gentle weight to it, as if the land is holding the warmth of yesterday through the night. Dew still appears, but it fades quickly under the increasing light. Inside the farmhouse, the rhythm of life remains simple. The fire is rarely needed except for cooking. Windows are open from morning to evening. Curtains shift softly with every breeze that passes through the house. Breakfast is often eaten quickly, not because of hurry, but because the day is already full with life outside. Fresh eggs. Bread. Fruit from the garden or nearby trees. Water drawn cool from the well. Then the day begins. The farmer steps outside into a world already awake. Birds are active early in summer mornings, moving through trees and fields in constant motion. Their calls form a scattered but familiar soundtrack. The insects are present too, humming steadily in the grass, never loud enough to disturb, but always there. The farm feels alive in layers. Above ground, movement. Within the soil, growth. In the air, sound and warmth. Daily work in midsummer becomes less about planting or preparing, and more about tending what already exists. Weeds still appear, especially after rain, and must be removed carefully from around crops. The farmer moves through the fields with practiced patience, checking rows one by one, ensuring that nothing unnecessary takes away from what is growing. There is a calm repetition in this work. Step. Pause. Observe. Adjust. Move forward. The fields stretch wide in every direction, and walking them gives a sense of quiet scale. Even after years of living here, the land never feels small. It feels continuous, like something without clear edges. The horse is used less in heavy labor now, but still helps with transport and small tasks. Its presence remains steady and familiar, a quiet companion in the daily rhythm of the farm. The barn during summer is open and bright. Light enters easily through the wooden gaps, and the scent of hay mixes with warm air drifting in from outside. Tools rest along the walls, used regularly but always returned to place. Everything has order, not strict or rigid, but natural. Afternoons grow warmer and slower. This is when the sun sits highest and strongest in the sky. The fields shimmer slightly under its heat, and even the air above them seems to ripple faintly. Work continues, but at a gentler pace. Sometimes the farmer rests in the shade near the barn, drinking water, listening to the steady hum of summer life. The sound of wind moving through corn becomes more noticeable in these quiet moments, like a long, soft wave passing through the land. There is no urgency in this season. Everything important has already been set in motion. Now it is about care. About attention. About waiting without impatience. The garden near the house reaches its peak in midsummer. Plants lean into each other, full and heavy with growth. Tomatoes hang low on vines, deepening in color day by day. Beans climb and twist along supports. Squash spreads outward, covering patches of ground in broad green leaves. Harvest from the garden happens gradually. A little each day. Never all at once. It becomes part of the rhythm of meals, connecting the kitchen directly to the soil just outside the door. Evenings in summer carry a special kind of calm. The heat softens as the sun lowers. Shadows stretch long and slow across the fields. The sky changes gently, shifting from bright gold to soft orange, then to a deeper blue that settles over everything like a quiet blanket. Work naturally comes to a close without being forced. Animals return on their own. The barn fills with familiar sounds of settling. Doors are closed. Water is checked one final time. Inside the house, supper is often lighter but fresh. Vegetables from the garden. Simple bread. Whatever the day has offered. The smell of cooking drifts through open windows and out into the evening air. After eating, time slows even further. There is no pressure to fill the hours. People sit. Sometimes near the porch. Sometimes inside near the open windows. Sometimes simply listening to the sounds of night arriving. Outside, the farm continues its quiet life without interruption. Crickets begin their steady rhythm. Trees move gently in the evening breeze. The fields, now fully grown, stand still but not silent. They hold a presence that is both calm and full. The sky darkens slowly. Stars appear in increasing number until the entire sky feels alive with light. And the farm, in this moment, feels complete within its season. Not finished. Not ending. Just fully in its time. Summer does not rush. It stretches. It lingers. It allows everything to exist exactly as it is. And as the night deepens over the fields, the crops continue their quiet growth, drawing strength from the warm soil and long days, moving steadily toward the next turning of the year, the slow approach of harvest. As summer moves past its middle and begins to lean toward its later days, the farm carries a slightly different feeling. At first, it is almost unnoticeable. The fields are still green. The sky is still wide and bright. The days are still long and warm. But something in the quality of light begins to change. The sun sits a little lower at certain hours. Morning arrives with a softer edge. Evening begins its slow descent just a little earlier than before. It is not a sudden shift. Only a gradual turning. The kind of change that happens so gently it feels more like remembering than becoming. The farmer notices these things without needing to name them. The land teaches awareness in quiet ways. Inside the farmhouse, summer routines continue with steady ease. Windows remain open through most of the day, allowing air to move freely through the rooms. Curtains shift softly with each passing breeze. The wooden floors warm during midday, then cool again in the evening, holding the memory of the sun. Breakfast is still simple and fresh. But now, more of it comes directly from the land outside the door. Garden vegetables are more abundant. Fruit is more frequent. Meals feel connected directly to the season's fullness. There is no storage mindset now. No waiting for winter. Only the present abundance of summer. Outside, the fields have reached their deepest green. Corn stands tall and strong, its leaves layered thickly, forming corridors of rustling sound whenever the wind passes through. Wheat fields carry a heavier look now, their heads fuller, slowly beginning the long process of ripening. Everything feels close to readiness, even if harvest is still ahead. The farmer moves through the land with the same steady attention as always. But now, the work changes slightly again. Instead of encouraging growth, the focus becomes protection and observation. Storms are more common in late summer. Clouds gather quickly in the distance, rising in tall shapes that cast moving shadows across the fields. The air shifts before rain arrives, carrying a weight that is easy to feel but hard to describe. The farmer watches the sky often. Not with worry, but with understanding. Some storms bring needed rain. Some bring wind that must be prepared for. In either case, the farm responds calmly. Barn doors are checked. Loose tools are secured. Animals are guided to shelter when needed. Then the storm passes. And everything settles again. Rain in late summer is different from spring rain. It is warmer. Heavier. It falls onto leaves and soil with a deeper sound, filling the world with steady motion for a short time. Afterward, the fields seem refreshed, their colors richer, their scent stronger. The smell of wet earth becomes especially noticeable. Deep. Rich. Familiar. After rain, the sun often returns quickly. Steam rises gently from the fields, creating a soft haze that lingers in the low light. It gives the entire landscape a dreamlike quality for a short while, as if the world is still deciding whether to be wet or dry. In the barn, late summer brings its own kind of preparation. Tools are checked again. Storage spaces are organized. Empty baskets are repaired or replaced. Everything begins to slowly turn toward harvest readiness. There is no rush in this process. Only quiet preparation. The kind that builds slowly over time without drawing attention to itself. Animals feel the shift too. They remain calm, but their routines adjust slightly. Cows graze in deeper sections of pasture where grass is still thick. The horse moves with steady patience, resting more often in shade during the warmest hours. Chickens continue their scattered movement across the yard, though even they seem to settle earlier in the evening as daylight shortens. Inside the house, afternoons often become slower. Heat builds during midday, encouraging rest in shaded rooms or quiet sitting near open windows. The sound of insects outside becomes more noticeable during these hours, forming a continuous background hum that defines late summer. Time feels unhurried, but full. Evenings remain one of the most peaceful parts of the day. The sun lowers with a deeper orange now, casting long shadows that stretch across fields already beginning their slow transformation toward maturity. The light feels heavier in the best possible way, as if the day is gently resting into night. Work ends naturally. There is no need to force it. Everything outside seems to understand when to pause. Supper is still made from fresh ingredients, though some stored food from earlier in the year begins to appear again in small amounts. The table holds a quiet balance between freshness and memory. After eating, the family often sits together without speaking much. Not out of distance, but out of comfort. The kind of comfort that does not require filling silence. Outside, night arrives softly. The sound of crickets becomes stronger now, joined occasionally by frogs near distant water or rustling leaves in the trees. The fields stand still but full, holding within them the slow progress of everything that has been growing since spring. The sky at night feels vast. Stars appear slowly, one after another, until the darkness is filled with a quiet brightness. And beneath it all, the farm continues its steady rhythm. Corn thickening. Wheat deepening. Gardens slowing their peak growth and beginning to turn toward completion. Everything moving toward harvest. Not quickly. Not urgently. But inevitably. The land does not hurry. It never has. It simply moves forward in its own time, as it always has, carrying the farm gently along with it. And as late summer deepens, there is a quiet sense throughout the fields that the season is nearing its fullest point, where growth will soon become gathering, and the slow life of the farm will turn once again toward the work of harvest. By the time late summer fully settles over the farm, the world feels heavy with life. Not in a loud or overwhelming way, but in a quiet fullness. As if everything that has been growing for months is now simply holding its place, waiting for the right moment to change. The fields reflect this feeling clearly. Corn stands at its tallest, leaves wide and layered, forming thick green corridors that sway gently in the wind. Wheat has shifted into deeper tones, no longer soft spring green but a stronger, more mature color that hints at gold beneath its surface. The garden near the house is overflowing now, plants stretching outward with the confidence of full growth. Everywhere, there is abundance. And everywhere, there is patience. The mornings begin with a familiar warmth now. Even before the sun rises fully, the air is no longer cool. It carries the weight of the coming day gently, like a slow exhale from the night. Dew still forms, but it disappears quickly as light spreads across the land. Inside the farmhouse, routines remain steady. Fire is used lightly, mostly for early cooking. Windows stay open. The house breathes with the season. Breakfast is simple but increasingly fresh. Garden produce becomes a constant presence. Fresh vegetables, fruit, bread, milk. Food feels closely tied to the land now, almost immediate in its connection. Outside, the farmer moves through the fields with careful attention. Late summer is a time of observation more than action. Crops are nearly ready, but not yet harvested. This is the stage where everything matters quietly. Too much rain can weigh down stalks. Too little can slow ripening. Wind can bend what is not yet strong enough. So each day begins with watching. Walking the rows. Noticing changes. Adjusting where needed. There is a deep familiarity in these movements now. After so many seasons, the land and the farmer seem to understand each other without needing instruction. In the barn, preparations reach their final stage. Storage areas are cleared. Tools are gathered and placed where they will be needed soon. Wagons are checked carefully, wheels tightened, wood reinforced. Everything is prepared for the coming harvest without hurry. Just readiness. The horse is rested and fed well, its strength maintained for the heavier work ahead. Even it seems to sense that change is near. Late summer weather brings a steady rhythm of its own. Some days are bright and still. Others bring slow-moving clouds that pass across the fields without urgency. Occasionally, late afternoon storms arrive, brief but strong, bringing heavy rain and wind that moves through the crops in visible waves. After such storms, the farmer walks the fields again. Checking. Observing. Making sure nothing has been damaged beyond repair. But most of the time, the land holds steady. It has grown strong through the season. The garden near the house begins to shift now. Some plants are still producing, but others are nearing their final stage. Leaves begin to slow their growth. Fruits ripen more quickly in the warm sun. There is a sense of completion forming quietly within it. The kitchen reflects this transition. Meals become more varied, shaped by what the garden offers each day. Some food is eaten immediately. Some is set aside for preservation. Drying. Storing. Preparing for the colder months that are still distant but always part of the farmer's awareness. Evenings grow slightly shorter now. The change is subtle but steady. Sunset arrives a little earlier each week. The light takes on a deeper quality, more golden, more saturated, as if the sky itself is preparing to shift toward autumn. Work ends naturally with the fading light. Animals return to their places without needing direction. The barn fills with familiar sounds of settling, feeding, and rest. Inside the farmhouse, supper becomes a quiet celebration of summer's fullness. Fresh food still dominates the table, but there is also a growing sense of reflection in it. This is the season of plenty. The season when the land gives most freely. After eating, the family often sits in silence or speaks softly near the open windows. Outside, the world continues its slow rhythm. Insects hum steadily in the grass. Trees move gently in the evening breeze. Fields stand full and heavy, their growth nearly complete. Night arrives with a calm certainty now. Stars appear over fields that are no longer just growing, but waiting. There is a stillness in this waiting. Not empty, but full. Full of what has been built over months of patience. Full of what will soon be gathered. And as the night settles deeper across the farm, the sense of approaching harvest becomes clearer, not as urgency, but as the natural next breath of the land. Everything has led here quietly. And everything now begins to prepare for the gentle turning from growth into gathering. In the next part, the story will move into the harvest season itself, where the farm's long patience finally meets the slow, steady work of bringing in the year's abundance. The first true signs of harvest do not arrive all at once. They begin in small, quiet ways that are easy to overlook unless you are already looking for them. A change in the color of the cornfield, where green begins to soften into pale gold at the edges. A heavier bend in the wheat, where stalks no longer stand quite as upright as they once did. A dry rustling sound in the wind that wasn't there a few weeks before. The farmer notices these changes early in the morning, when the world is still cool and the light is gentle across the land. There is no rush in this noticing. Only readiness. Only understanding. Harvest is not a single moment on the farm. It is a slow unfolding. A transition that happens row by row, field by field, day by day. Inside the farmhouse, the rhythm of life shifts subtly. Breakfast is taken a little earlier. The day begins with a clearer sense of purpose. There is still calm, still quiet, but beneath it is a steady awareness that the most important work of the year has begun. The fire in the hearth is smaller now, used mainly for early meals before the sun fully warms the house. Windows are open more often, letting in the cool morning air that carries the scent of ripening fields. Outside, the first full days of harvest begin. The farmer walks into the cornfield with a basket and steady hands. The sound of dry leaves brushing against sleeves becomes more present now. Corn stalks stand tall, but their energy has shifted. They are no longer growing upward. They are holding what they have grown. Each ear is gathered carefully. Twist. Pull. Place. Repeat. The motion is steady, almost meditative. The field responds with soft sounds as the plants release what they have been holding for months. The baskets slowly fill, and the wagon waits at the edge of the field to carry the harvest back toward the barn. There is no loud celebration. Only work. But it is a kind of work that feels meaningful in its simplicity. In the wheat fields, the change is even more visible. Golden waves stretch across the land now, moving gently with every shift of wind. The grain is ready, heavy with maturity. When the farmer steps into the field, the sound changes beneath his feet, drier, crisper, like walking through something that has completed its long journey of growth. The cutting begins slowly. Sickle in hand. Stalks gathered and sliced in steady motion. Bundle after bundle is formed, tied, and set upright in small groups across the field. These rows of gathered wheat stand quietly in the sun, waiting to be moved. From a distance, they look like resting shapes scattered across the land. Each one a small piece of the year's work. The horse moves carefully between fields, pulling wagons that now carry the weight of the season. Its pace is steady, unhurried, familiar with this time of year. The barn begins to fill again with the scent of grain and dry stalks. Inside, the air grows warmer and more layered. Dust floats in soft beams of sunlight. The sound of work echoes gently: wood, rope, grain, footsteps on packed earth. Everything has purpose. Everything has place. The rhythm of harvest days is long, but never chaotic. Morning begins early. Work continues through the bright hours. Midday brings a short pause for food and water. Afternoon returns to the fields. Evening gathers everything back toward the barn and farmhouse. Meals during harvest feel especially grounding. Simple food eaten with tired hands. Bread, stew, vegetables from the garden still giving their final yield. There is a quiet satisfaction in eating after long hours in the field. Not excitement. Not celebration. Just steady fulfillment. As the days pass, more of the fields are cleared. Corn is stacked in the barn. Wheat is stored carefully in dry, safe spaces. The garden continues to give, though now at a slower pace, as summer's peak begins to pass. Late afternoons carry a golden weight. The sun lowers across harvested fields, casting long shadows over stubble and empty rows. Where once there was dense green, there is now open land again, breathing in its own way after months of fullness. The air feels different here. Softer. More open. As if the land is exhaling after holding its breath all summer. Evenings become especially peaceful during harvest season. The work is physically demanding, but it brings a deep sense of completion to the day. When the tools are finally set down and the animals are returned to shelter, there is a quiet stillness that settles over everything. Inside the farmhouse, lantern light replaces daylight. The glow is warm and steady. The sound of the fire returns as a central presence in the room. And as the family sits together after supper, there is often a long silence, not empty, but full of the day's labor, full of the land's response, full of the slow rhythm that has carried them here. Outside, the fields rest. Harvested in parts, still waiting in others. The sky above them turns deep and calm as night arrives. Stars appear once again over the open land. And in that quiet, the farm holds the feeling of completion and continuation at the same time. Because even as harvest moves forward, the cycle is never truly ending. It is simply turning. In the next part, the story will continue into the closing days of harvest and the first quiet steps toward autumn's deeper stillness, where the farm begins to settle once again after its busiest season. As harvest continues into its final stretch, the farm begins to feel both full and empty at the same time. Full, because the barn holds the weight of the year's work, corn stacked in careful rows, wheat stored safely away, baskets and sacks and bundles filling the spaces that once felt open and empty, because the fields outside slowly lose their density, row by row, becoming open ground once again. There is a quiet shift in the landscape. What once was green abundance is now turning into stubble and soil, marked by the memory of growth rather than growth itself. The mornings arrive cooler again. Not cold like winter. Not soft like spring. But something in between, crisp, steady, and clear. The farmer wakes before sunrise as always, but now the air carries a sharper edge that reminds him the year is moving forward again. Dew rests heavily on what remains of the fields, and the grass near the barn is beginning to thin in places where footsteps have passed again and again. Inside the farmhouse, the rhythm of life slows just slightly after the intensity of harvest days. There is still work each day, but it is no longer all-consuming. Breakfast returns to a calmer pace. Fire is used more again in the early morning. The scent of cooked food lingers longer in the cooler air. Outside, the final sections of harvest are gathered. The last rows of corn. The final patches of wheat. Late vegetables from the garden. Each movement feels like a closing chapter. Not rushed. Not hurried. Just steadily completed. The farmer walks through the fields that have already been cleared. They feel different underfoot now. Open. Light. Resting. The soil, freshly exposed after months of growth above it, has a darker tone again. It is moist in places, dry in others, shaped by the long season that has just passed. There is a kind of silence in these fields that is different from winter silence. It is not frozen. It is not still. It is simply finished. The wagon now carries fewer loads each day as harvest nears its end. The barn, however, feels fuller than ever. Inside, the scent of stored grain becomes stronger as the days pass. Corn is shelled and moved into bins. Wheat is measured and checked for dryness. Everything is organized with careful attention, because what is stored now must last through the coming months. The barn feels like the heart of the farm in the season. Warm from stored life. Heavy with the year's work. Dust floats through sunlight in slow, drifting paths, settling on wood beams and old tools. The horse rests more often now between tasks. Its role in the hardest work of harvest is nearly complete for the year. It moves with calm familiarity, as if it understands the shift in season as deeply as the people do. In the garden, late crops are gathered in the final waves of production. What remains is picked carefully before the first stronger autumn chills arrive. Some plants are pulled from the ground entirely. Others are left to finish their cycle naturally. The garden begins to look less full now, more open, but still alive in its own way. Evenings during this time are especially quiet. The urgency of harvest is gone, but its memory remains in the body. Tiredness settles in gently. Not heavy. Just steady. Work ends earlier each day as fields are completed. The sky becomes more noticeable again in the late hours. Sunsets stretch longer now, carrying deeper tones of orange, gold, and soft fading red across the horizon. There is a feeling of transition in the air. Summer is no longer present in its fullness. Autumn is arriving more clearly now. Not sudden. Just inevitable. Inside the farmhouse, supper is calm and unhurried. The table feels fuller again, not with abundance from the fields, but with the quiet satisfaction of work completed. Conversation, when it comes, is soft. Often, there is long silence between words. A silence that feels earned. After eating, the family often sits near the fire. Tools are cleaned and set aside. Clothing is mended or folded. But much of the evening is simply rest. Outside, the fields are now mostly cleared. Stubble remains where crops once stood tall. The land feels open again, as if it has returned to itself after a long season of giving. Wind moves more freely across it now. Without tall corn or dense wheat to slow it down, it travels in long, gentle sweeps. The sound it makes is soft and continuous, like a distant breath moving through the earth. Night comes earlier each evening. The change is subtle but steady. Lanterns are lit sooner. Shadows gather faster across the yard. Stars appear over the farm while some work is still finishing inside the barn. And slowly, harvest reaches its end. The final loads are brought in. The last bundles are stored. The fields stand quiet and open once more. There is no moment of loud completion. Only a gradual settling. The farm, having given and received so much through the growing season, now rests in the quiet aftermath of its work. And in that stillness, there is no emptiness. Only readiness for what comes next. Because even as harvest ends, the cycle continues to turn. The land begins its slow preparation for rest. And the farm moves gently into the quiet heart of autumn, where the days grow softer, the air grows cooler, and life begins once again to slow into deeper stillness. After harvest, the farm enters a quieter kind of time. Not empty. Not inactive. But softened, as if the land itself has finally set something down after carrying it for so long. The fields lie open now. Wide stretches of soil where crops once stood in dense green rows. Stubble remains in uneven patterns, and the earth shows signs of the long season it has just lived through. There is a rawness to it, but also a calmness, like a room after everything has been carefully put away. Morning light returns in a gentler form. The sun rises later than it did in summer, and the air carries a cooler edge that reminds the body that change is continuing. Dew settles on the ground again in heavier layers, and mist sometimes gathers low across the fields before lifting slowly into the sky. Inside the farmhouse, life feels steadier again. The urgency of harvest is gone, replaced by routine tasks that are important but unhurried. Breakfast is simple and warm. The fire in the hearth becomes central once more, especially in the early hours when the house still holds the chill of night. The windows remain open at times, but not as wide, not as long. The air outside is cooler now, and it moves differently through the rooms, less heavy with growth, more clear with approaching autumn. The barn is the quiet center of daily attention. It now holds the year's results. Grain stored in bins. Corn carefully shelled and stacked. Tools cleaned and arranged. The space feels full, but settled. No longer in motion, but at rest. The farmer spends time maintaining what has been gathered. Checking storage. Ensuring dryness. Repairing anything that was worn during harvest. There is satisfaction in this work, but it is not excitement. It is completion. The horse, now less burdened by heavy labor, moves more slowly through its daily tasks. It stands in the barn with a calm patience, occasionally shifting its weight or resting its head against the wooden stall. The animals around the farm also begin to adjust. Cows graze more freely in the remaining pasture. Chickens spread farther across the yard during the day. Everything feels slightly more relaxed, as if the pressure of the growing season has lifted. Outside, the landscape begins its quiet transformation toward autumn. The green of late summer fades into softer tones. Leaves on distant trees begin to shift at the edges, not yet fully changed, but no longer holding the deep fullness of summer. The wind becomes more noticeable. It moves across the open fields with a clearer sound now, unblocked by tall crops. Sometimes it carries the scent of dry earth, sometimes the faint smell of wood smoke from nearby farms preparing for colder months. Afternoons are calm and steady. There is still work, but it is lighter. Fence lines are checked. Small repairs are made. Firewood is gathered gradually in preparation for the coming cold. Nothing is rushed. Everything is done in its own time. There is a feeling in the season that the land is exhaling. After months of growth and harvest, it is returning to a quieter state. Not asleep. Not inactive. Just resting. Evenings arrive earlier now. The sky darkens faster, and the transition from daylight to night feels more noticeable. Sunset carries deeper colors: burnt orange, muted gold, soft fading pink before giving way to the deep blue of evening. Inside the farmhouse, the fire becomes more present again. Its glow fills the room in the early hours of night, casting long, gentle shadows across wooden walls and familiar furniture. Supper is warm and grounding. Food feels more connected to storage now, to what has been carefully gathered and preserved. There is less immediacy, but more reflection. After eating, the family often sits quietly. There is no need for many words. The day has already spoken enough in its own way. Outside, the fields grow quieter with each passing evening. Grass begins to thin in places. The soil holds moisture from autumn rains. The air cools steadily, and the sound of insects shifts slightly, becoming softer, less constant than in summer. The farm begins to feel spacious again. Not empty in a cold sense, but open. Like a long breath held gently at rest. The farmer sometimes walks the edge of the fields in the evening light. Not to work, but to observe. To feel the change of season as it continues its slow movement forward. The earth beneath his boots feels different now. Cooler. Softer. Less active, but still alive beneath the surface. And as the night settles over the land, the farm holds a deep and steady peace. The busiest part of the year has passed. The harvest is complete. The land has given what it could. And now, everything begins to turn gently toward the quiet stillness of autumn, where the world slows once again, and the cycle rests before it begins anew. Autumn settles more deeply now, not as a sudden arrival, but as a slow, steady presence that fills every corner of the farm. The air changes first. It carries a cooler clarity in the mornings, as if the night has stayed a little longer in the world. When the farmer steps outside before sunrise, the yard feels different beneath his boots. The ground is firmer again, and the grass holds a damp chill that speaks quietly of approaching frost. The fields, once full and green, now rest in muted tones. Stalks that once held grain stand dry and pale, bending gently in the wind. The soil is exposed in wide stretches, dark and open, waiting without urgency. There is a stillness in this openness that feels natural, as if the land is simply breathing between seasons. Inside the farmhouse, the rhythm of life returns to a calm, familiar steadiness. The fire in the hearth is once again central, not for survival alone, but for comfort. Its glow fills the room softly during mornings and evenings, casting warm light across worn wooden tables and well-used chairs. Windows are closed more often now, especially at night. The air outside carries too much chill to leave them open for long. Breakfast is warm and simple. Porridge steaming in bowls. Bread gently toasted near the fire. Milk or tea shared quietly at the table. There is no rush in these moments. Only the gentle beginning of another day. Outside, daily work shifts again with the season. The farmer now turns attention toward preparation for winter. Firewood becomes important once more. Trees at the edge of the land are carefully chosen, not in abundance, but with purpose. Each log is split slowly, stacked neatly, and stored close to the house where it will be needed in colder months. The sound of the axe returns to the morning air. Not hurried. Not harsh. Just steady. Lift. Fall. Split. Pause. The rhythm blends into the quiet of the farm, becoming part of the seasonal soundscape. In the barn, animals begin to settle into a slower pace. The horse spends more time resting, its movement unhurried. Cows remain calm, their grazing patterns shorter as grass growth slows. Chickens gather earlier in the evening, responding instinctively to the shortening days. Everything feels guided now by the rhythm of light itself. As the sun rises later and sets earlier, life adjusts without instruction. It simply follows. The garden near the house reaches its final stage. What remains is gathered carefully before the first hard frost arrives. Some plants are pulled completely from the soil, leaving empty beds behind. Others continue for a little while longer, holding on to the last warmth of the season. There is a quiet sense of closure in this work. Not sadness. Just completion. The kitchen reflects the season clearly. Meals rely more on stored food now. Preserved vegetables. Dried herbs. Grains from the barn. Apples kept in cool storage spaces. Everything feels connected to what was gathered earlier in the year, as if summer's work is still quietly supporting the present moment. Afternoons grow softer in light. The sun sits lower in the sky even when the day is still young. Shadows stretch longer across the fields, and the colors of the landscape deepen into richer browns, soft yellows, and fading greens. The wind becomes more noticeable. It moves across the open land with a clearer presence now, no longer softened by tall crops or dense summer growth. Sometimes it carries the sound of distant movement, leaves shifting in trees, branches brushing together, or the faint rustle of dry grass along fence lines. Evenings arrive with a calm predictability. The transition from day to night feels steady, almost ceremonial in its repetition. Light fades. Lanterns are lit. Warmth gathers inside the house. Supper is shared in a quiet atmosphere, often with less conversation and more presence. The day's work is behind them, and the evening belongs to rest. Afterward, there is time for small tasks. Mending. Sorting. Preparing. But more often now, there is simply stillness. The kind that feels earned rather than empty. Outside, the land continues its slow preparation for winter. Leaves fall more frequently now, gathering in soft layers along the edges of fields and paths. The trees stand thinner each day, their branches more visible against the sky. The air grows sharper in the evenings. And sometimes, just before dawn, a thin frost appears across the ground, silvering the world for a short time before melting away. The farmer walks the land less now, but still occasionally at dusk. These walks are quieter than before. More reflective. The fields feel different underfoot again. Not active. Not growing. But resting. Holding the memory of everything that has passed through them in the year. As night settles over the farm, the fire burns steadily inside the house, and the warmth of the home becomes more noticeable against the cooling world outside. The cycle continues its gentle turning. Harvest is complete. Autumn deepens. And the farm, having given and received through another full year, now moves slowly toward the deep stillness of winter once again, where life will quiet further, and the world will rest beneath cold and silence before the next beginning. By the time late autumn returns in full, the farm feels almost suspended in a quiet in-between state. The rush of harvest is long gone. The fullness of summer is only a memory held in stored grain and preserved food. And winter has not yet arrived, though it is close enough to be felt in the air. Each morning begins with a colder edge now. The kind of cold that does not bite sharply, but lingers gently in the skin and breath. When the farmer opens the door before sunrise, he is met with stillness outside. The yard is often covered in a thin layer of frost, white and fragile, breaking softly underfoot. The fields are quieter than they have been all year. Open stretches of soil and stubble lie under pale light, occasionally stirred by a slow-moving wind. There is no growth now. Only rest. Only preparation for what comes next. Inside the farmhouse, warmth becomes the center of everything again. The fire is steady and necessary. It burns longer each day, filling the house with its soft orange glow and familiar scent of wood smoke. The rooms feel smaller in winter's approach, not physically, but in the way warmth gathers and holds everything closer. Breakfast is slow and comforting. Warm food shared in a quiet kitchen. Bread softened by heat. Porridge thick and steady. Tea or milk held in warm hands. The morning is not rushed, because the day no longer demands urgency. Outside, work shifts fully into preparation mode. Firewood is now essential. The stack beside the house grows larger each day, carefully arranged to stay dry through coming rain and snow. The sound of splitting wood becomes part of the landscape again, steady, repetitive, grounding. Lift. Strike. Split. Stack. The rhythm is familiar, like a heartbeat for the season. In the barn, everything feels settled and secure. The stored harvest remains carefully organized. Grain, corn, and supplies are checked regularly, not out of worry, but out of habit and responsibility. Animals spend more time indoors now. The horse stands quietly in its stall, warm breath rising in soft clouds. Cows remain calm, their movement slow and measured. Chickens gather earlier each day as light fades sooner. The barn becomes a place of shelter more than activity. A quiet shelter filled with the scent of hay, wood, and living warmth. Outside, the land continues to shift into late autumn. Trees are nearly bare now, their branches open to the sky. Leaves gather in soft piles along fences and paths, rustling gently when the wind moves through them. The sound of the farm has changed. Less growth. More movement of air. More silence between sounds. Even the wind feels different now. It carries a deeper tone, cooler and more constant, as if it is preparing the land for the stillness ahead. Afternoons are shorter in light but rich in atmosphere. The sun sits lower in the sky, casting long shadows across empty fields. Its light is softer now, filtered through thin clouds or open sky, painting everything in muted gold and pale amber. Work during this time is light but necessary. Small repairs. Final checks on tools. Securing anything that winter winds might disturb. There is a sense of closure in these tasks. Not dramatic. Just steady completion. The garden is now fully cleared. Empty beds rest under open sky, waiting for the next cycle to begin. Sometimes the farmer walks through this space slowly, remembering what it looked like only a few months before, full, green, alive with movement and growth. Now it is quiet again. Not lifeless. Just resting. Evenings grow more prominent in the rhythm of the day. They arrive early and gently. The transition from daylight to darkness feels longer now, as if the world is taking its time to settle. Inside the farmhouse, lanterns are lit earlier. Their glow spreads across wooden walls and familiar spaces, creating a warm contrast against the cold outside. Supper becomes the final shared moment of the day. Simple food. Warmth. Presence. The kind of meal that feels more like comfort than fuel. Afterward, the house slows into stillness. Some small tasks remain: mending, sorting, preparing, but more often now, the evening belongs to quiet rest. The fire becomes the focus. Its soft crackle fills the silence without breaking it. Outside, the world is preparing for its deepest rest. Frost appears more often. Some mornings, ice forms on the edges of buckets and along fence rails. The air grows sharper with each passing day. And yet there is no resistance in the farm to this change. Only acceptance. Because it has come every year before. And it will come again. The farmer walks the edge of the fields one last time before full winter settles in. The ground feels firm and cool beneath his boots. The land is no longer active in appearance, but it is not lifeless. It holds everything that has passed through it: the planting, the growth, the harvest, all layered beneath the surface like memory. As night arrives, the farmhouse glows warmly in the distance. A small steady light against a wide, cooling world. Inside, the family sits near the fire, surrounded by the comfort of shelter and warmth. And outside, the fields wait quietly beneath the deepening season, resting in silence, ready for winter's full arrival. The cycle continues. Slow. Steady. Unbroken. And as the year turns fully toward winter again, the farm settles into its quietest season, where life slows even further, and everything rests beneath the stillness of snow and cold, waiting for the gentle return of spring once more. Winter returns to the farm in a way that feels familiar, almost like an old memory settling back into place. It does not arrive suddenly. It simply becomes more present each day. First in the air, which grows sharper and clearer in the mornings. Then in the ground, which begins to harden under thin layers of frost. And finally in the sky, which often holds a pale, heavy stillness, as if snow is always somewhere nearby, waiting its turn. The fields, now fully at rest, lie open and quiet beneath the changing season. There is no green growth to be seen. No movement of crops. Only the wide, open land holding the marks of everything it has given throughout the year. Rows from planting still faintly visible. Stubble from harvest softened by wind and rain. And beneath it all, soil resting quietly, unchanged on the surface but full of hidden life waiting for spring. Inside the farmhouse, winter becomes the center of everything once again. The fire in the hearth is no longer optional. It is essential. Each morning begins with its tending. Coals are uncovered. Dry wood is added. Flame returns slowly, spreading warmth through the room in soft waves. The sound of it becomes part of the house again: the gentle crackle, the occasional pop of burning wood, the steady glow that fills corners and shadows. The house feels smaller in winter, not in size, but in closeness. Everything gathers toward warmth. Breakfast is always warm. Always simple. Food that holds heat well and comforts the body against the cold outside. The family moves slowly in the mornings, not because of laziness, but because the world itself encourages a slower pace. Outside, the farm is quiet in a deeper way now. Snow begins to fall in soft, uneven patterns. Sometimes light and drifting. Sometimes steady and covering everything in a single calm layer. The sound of the world changes completely when snow is present. Footsteps become muted. Wind feels softer. Even distant sounds seem to fade into the air rather than travel through it. The farmer continues his routine, but now it is shaped by winter's limits. The walk to the barn is shorter in purpose, but still necessary each day. Boots sink into snow that shifts between soft powder and packed paths depending on the weather. The barn doors open with a familiar creak, releasing a warm scent of hay and animals into the cold air outside. Inside, life continues in its own steady rhythm. The horse stands calmly in its stall, breath visible in slow white clouds. Cows remain steady and patient, chewing quietly, resting often. Chickens cluster together for warmth, their movements small and contained. The barn feels like a separate world from the frozen land outside. A world of warmth, breath, and soft sound. Firewood becomes even more important now. The stack beside the house is checked frequently. Logs are carried in smaller loads, but more often throughout the day. The sound of splitting wood continues even in colder mornings, though it is slower now, as the body adjusts to winter's weight. Lift. Strike. Crack. Carry. Return. A rhythm that does not change, even when the land does. Inside the farmhouse, daily life becomes more inward. More centered around small, simple tasks. Cooking. Repairing. Maintaining tools. Mending clothing. Sitting near the fire as the day moves slowly past the windows. The windows themselves become frames for a quiet world. Snow falling in soft patterns. Wind moving across fields in visible waves. Trees standing dark and still against pale skies. Time feels different in winter. Less divided. More continuous. Morning blends into afternoon. Afternoon into evening. Evening into night. Without urgency, the day becomes a long gentle arc of warmth and rest. Meals remain simple but steady. Soup simmering slowly. Bread warmed near the fire. Preserved food from earlier seasons brought forward again. There is comfort in this repetition. Comfort in knowing exactly what the day will bring. Outside, the farm rests under snow. Not inactive. Not empty. Just deeply quiet. The land holds itself in stillness, preserving energy beneath its frozen surface. Occasionally, the farmer steps outside during snowfall. The air is sharp and clean. Each breath visible for a moment before disappearing. The fields stretch out in every direction, softened by white, boundaries fading into the distance. There is a sense of space here that feels different from other seasons. A wide silence that is not empty, but complete. As evening comes, the farmhouse glows warmly against the cold world outside. Lantern light joins firelight, creating a steady warmth that feels almost constant. Inside, the family gathers close. Not out of necessity alone, but out of habit, comfort, and shared stillness. Outside, night settles fully over the snow-covered land. Stars appear slowly in a dark, clear sky. The wind moves gently across open fields. And the farm, once again in its quietest season, rests beneath winter's long calm presence. Everything has slowed. Everything has softened. And everything is waiting. Not in tension, but in peace. Because this is what the cycle always becomes at its deepest point. Stillness. Warmth. And time moving gently forward, toward a spring that has not yet arrived, but is already quietly on its way. Winter continues its quiet hold over the farm, but by now it is no longer new. It is simply the way the world is for a time. The early sharpness of its arrival has softened into something steadier, something the land and the people have already learned to live within. Each day begins in a familiar pattern. The farmhouse is the first place to stir. The fire is always the first task. Before anything else, before even breakfast fully begins, warmth is brought back into the room. The hearth becomes the center of the house again, as it has been in every winter before this one. The glow spreads slowly across wooden walls and worn surfaces. It reaches into corners where shadows gather. It makes the air feel less heavy. Outside, the world remains quiet beneath snow. Not silent in a complete way, but gently muted, as if everything has been wrapped in a soft covering that absorbs sound. The fields are no longer visible in detail. Only shapes remain beneath the white surface. Soft rises. Low lines. The memory of rows and paths now hidden beneath winter's layer. The farmer steps outside each morning with the same steady purpose. The cold meets him immediately, but it is no longer surprising. It is expected. Boots press into snow that shifts slightly with each step, leaving behind a clear trail that slowly fills again if the wind passes through. The barn is always the first destination. Inside, warmth waits in a different form. Animals breathing. Hay stored in soft stacks. Wooden beams holding steady above a space that feels protected from the outside world. The horse stands calmly, occasionally shifting its weight, its breath forming slow clouds in the cool air. Cows remain settled, their movements minimal and unhurried. Chickens cluster in quiet groups, conserving warmth and energy. Everything in the barn moves at winter's pace. Slow. Deliberate. Uncomplicated. Daily work becomes simple but necessary. Feeding animals. Checking water, which sometimes requires breaking thin ice that forms overnight. Carrying small loads of feed. Ensuring that nothing essential is lacking. The tasks are not difficult, but they are constant. And in their constancy, they create structure for the day. Outside, snow changes in small ways. Some days it falls steadily, soft and continuous, covering the land again even after previous layers have settled. Other days, it stops entirely, leaving behind a bright stillness where sunlight reflects off white surfaces and fills the world with a quiet glow. The farm looks different in these moments. Wider. Simpler. As if all detail has been reduced to shape and light. Inside the farmhouse, time feels even slower than outside. Afternoons are long and quiet. There is always something to do, but nothing urgent. Clothing is mended near the fire. Tools are cleaned and prepared for future use. Food is prepared slowly, often in larger pots that simmer gently throughout the day. The sound of boiling water or crackling fire becomes part of the background of winter life. There is comfort in this repetition. In knowing that each day will feel familiar. Evenings arrive early, as they always do in winter. The light outside fades quickly, sometimes before what feels like a full day has passed. Lanterns are lit sooner. Shadows gather in corners of the house more quickly. But inside, everything remains warm. The fire holds its steady presence. Supper is quiet and grounding. Simple meals shared without hurry. There is often little to say, not because of distance, but because the day itself has already spoken in its own slow language. After eating, the family gathers near the fire. Sometimes there is conversation. Sometimes there is silence. Both feel equally natural. Outside, the wind moves across the fields in long, soft currents. It shifts snow gently rather than violently. It smooths the surface of the land, erasing old footprints and reshaping the quiet landscape into something fresh again. The farm continues its deep rest. The soil beneath the snow remains unchanged on the surface, but not inactive. It holds moisture. It holds memory. It holds the quiet promise of what will come when warmth returns. The farmer sometimes stands at the edge of the fields during the evening. Not for long. Just enough to feel the air. Just enough to see the shape of the land stretching out beneath winter's cover. There is no urgency in this looking. Only awareness. Only connection. The sky above is often clear in winter nights. Stars appear bright and sharp against deep darkness. The air is still enough that even the smallest sounds feel distant. The farmhouse glows in the distance, a steady point of warmth in a wide, cold world. And within that contrast, there is a deep sense of balance. The land rests. The house holds warmth. Life continues, but quietly. Always quietly. As winter moves forward, there is no expectation of change yet. Only the steady continuation of what the season has always been. Rest. Preservation. Stillness. And the gentle, unspoken understanding that beneath all of this quiet, the cycle is already waiting. Not rushing. Not pushing. Just waiting, as it always does, for the first soft sign of spring that will one day begin everything again. By the time deep winter settles fully over the farm, even the idea of change begins to feel distant. Not gone. Just quiet. Like something resting far beneath the surface, not asking to be seen yet. The days move in a steady, almost gentle repetition now. Morning light arrives slowly, often filtered through a pale gray sky. Sometimes snow is falling, sometimes the world is still, but it always feels cold in the same familiar way. Inside the farmhouse, warmth remains the center of everything. The fire is tended without thinking. It becomes a kind of rhythm the hands remember on their own. Wood is added. Flame is watched. Heat spreads through the rooms in soft waves. The house feels especially close in deep winter. Not cramped. Just gathered. As if everything important has moved inward for the season. Breakfast is always warm. Always simple. A steady beginning to a day that will not demand too much movement outside. The sound of the wind is less frequent now, but when it comes, it moves across the fields in long, smooth stretches. It does not rush. It does not press. It simply passes through the open land, carrying cold air from one place to another. Outside, the farm is fully at rest. Snow has settled into a more permanent presence now, no longer just a passing layer but a continuous covering that softens every shape it touches. The fields are completely quiet beneath it. No visible rows. No signs of growth or harvest. Only the gentle outline of the land itself. The farmer's work continues each day, but it is reduced to its most essential form. Feeding animals. Maintaining warmth. Checking supplies. Ensuring that nothing within the barn or house is left unattended in the cold. The walk to the barn remains part of the daily rhythm, even in the deepest cold. Boots press into packed snow along the familiar path. The air feels sharp but clean. Breath rises and fades with each step. Inside the barn, life is steady and calm. Animals are quiet, conserving energy. Their presence fills the space with warmth that contrasts the cold outside. The horse stands in stillness, occasionally shifting, its breath slow and visible. Cows rest more often, their movements minimal. Chickens stay close together, forming small clusters of warmth in their own quiet way. The barn feels like a second hearth for the farm. A larger, shared warmth that holds life through the coldest months. Water sometimes freezes overnight, and breaking the thin layer of ice becomes part of the morning routine. It is simple work. Repetitive work. Work that connects the farmer directly to the reality of winter. lift, break, pour, check, return. There is a calm acceptance in this rhythm. Inside the farmhouse, afternoons are long and still. Time does not feel empty. It feels extended, as if each hour has been given space to exist fully without interruption. The fire remains steady. Light shifts slowly across walls and furniture as the day passes. There is often no urgency for tasks. Only the gentle presence of time moving forward at its own pace. Meals are warm and comforting. Stews, soups, bread kept close to the fire. Food that does not require complexity, only care. The act of eating becomes part of the rhythm of staying warm, staying steady, staying connected to the day. Evenings arrive early again, though by now it feels completely natural. Darkness does not feel sudden. It feels expected. Lanterns are lit. Shadows gather. The fire grows brighter by comparison, filling the room with soft, steady light. Outside, the world settles into full night. Snow reflects what little light remains, making even darkness feel faintly visible. The farm is still. Deeply still. Not lifeless. Not empty. Just resting in its most complete form of quiet. Sometimes, in the late hours, the farmer stands near the door before fully closing the day. Looking out across the fields. There is nothing moving there. Only snow. Only silence. Only the wide, open shape of land waiting beneath winter's cover. And in that moment, there is a sense of continuity that does not need explanation. Because nothing here is ending. It is simply pausing. Holding. Resting. The same way it always has. The same way it always will. Inside, the warmth of the farmhouse continues to glow against the cold outside world. The fire burns low but steady through the night. And as the farm settles deeper into winter's long calm, there is a quiet understanding in everything that even in the stillest season, the cycle has never truly stopped. It is only waiting. Gently. Patiently. For the slow return of light. Winter, in its deepest weeks, begins to feel less like a season passing through time and more like time itself slowing down. The farm does not change much from day to day now. And yet, within that stillness, there is a quiet kind of movement that can only be noticed when nothing is rushing. The mornings are pale and soft. Light arrives without urgency, often filtered through thin clouds or falling snow. The world outside the farmhouse appears gentle in its quiet uniformity, fields covered evenly in white, fences softened by frost, distant trees standing still and dark against the sky. Inside, the day begins in warmth long before it is felt outside. The fire is already alive in the hearth. It does not roar or demand attention. It simply exists, steady and dependable, shaping the room with its slow glow. Wood is added at regular moments throughout the morning, not because it is needed immediately, but because it is part of the rhythm that keeps everything balanced. The farmhouse feels especially calm in deep winter. Sounds carry differently here. The creak of wood. The soft movement of footsteps. The quiet shift of air as doors open and close. Everything feels contained, as if the house is holding the warmth carefully and not letting it escape too quickly. Breakfast is unhurried. Warm food shared in the same familiar place. The same familiar silence between small movements. There is comfort in this repetition, in knowing exactly how the morning will unfold without needing to think about it. Outside, the farm remains under a steady blanket of snow. By now, it has settled into layers that are no longer changing quickly. Wind moves across it occasionally, smoothing surfaces or shaping small drifts along fences and low ground. but for the most part, it rests. The fields are completely quiet beneath that white cover. No visible life. No visible growth. And yet, even in this stillness, the land is not absent. It is simply waiting in its deepest form of rest. The farmer's daily path to the barn remains unchanged. It is one of the few movements that anchors each day. Boots press into familiar tracks in the snow. The air meets the face with a clean sharpness that never fully loses its edge, even after weeks of winter. Inside the barn, warmth feels immediate. Alive in a different way than the farmhouse. It comes from bodies, from breath, from the shared presence of animals who continue their quiet routines without concern for time passing outside. The horse stands still, patient as always, its breath drifting upward in slow visible patterns. Cows rest and rise with gentle movements, their world reduced to shelter, food, and calm. Chickens remain clustered, their small sounds soft and repetitive. The barn becomes a space where life continues in the simplest possible form. Not growth. Not production. Just endurance. The farmer moves through these tasks with steady familiarity. Feeding. Checking. Refilling. Adjusting small details that keep the winter balance in place. There is no urgency in any of it. Only care. Only attention. Outside, the snow changes slowly over time. Some days it falls again, fresh and light, covering old impressions and making the world feel newly reset. Other days, it stays still and bright, reflecting the weak winter sun and filling the landscape with a quiet glow that reaches even into the farmhouse windows. Afternoons are long and gentle. There is no pressure to move quickly, no expectation for anything beyond what is necessary. The fire remains central, always present. Its light shifts slowly across the room as the hours pass, marking time in a way that feels more natural than any clock. Small tasks fill the space between meals and rest. Repairing tools. Organizing stored supplies. Sitting quietly and watching the fire change shape over time. There is a deep calm in this kind of living. Not excitement. Not boredom. Just presence. Evenings come early, as they always do in the season, but they feel more complete than rushed. Lanterns are lit. Shadows gather softly. The farmhouse becomes its own small world of warmth surrounded by cold silence. Outside, night settles over the snow-covered fields. The wind is often absent at this hour, leaving the world in still stillness. The sky is dark and wide, sometimes filled with stars that feel closer in the clarity of winter air. And the farm remains quiet beneath it all. Resting. Holding. Enduring. There is no expectation for anything more in this moment. Only the continuation of what has always been true, that the land moves in cycles too large to rush, too gentle to force, and too steady to ever truly stop. Inside the farmhouse, warmth continues to glow softly through the night. And in that contrast between cold world and living fire, the deepest part of winter feels not like absence but like a pause in breath, waiting for the next slow return of spring. At this point in winter, the farm no longer feels like it is moving toward anything. It simply is. A quiet world held in place for a time. The days are steady and predictable, not because they are repetitive in a dull way, but because they have found their natural shape for the season. Nothing asks to be hurried. Nothing demands change. Even the light feels slower now. Morning arrives with a soft gray presence, as if the sky itself is still resting. Snow, when it falls, does so without urgency, drifting down in quiet patterns that soften everything they touch. Inside the farmhouse, warmth is never absent. The fire continues its steady work throughout the day, not as something dramatic or bright, but as a constant companion. Its glow moves across the room in subtle shifts, marking time in ways that feel more natural than any schedule. The air inside carries a familiar mix of wood smoke, warm cloth, and simple food. Breakfast is a quiet beginning. Warm bowls held in steady hands. Simple flavors that do not try to be more than they are. Outside, the farm remains fully in its winter form. Fields are still buried beneath snow, their shapes only gently suggested by the land beneath. Fences appear and disappear depending on drifting patterns. Trees stand in bare silence, their branches thin and dark against pale sky. There is no visible activity across the open ground. And yet, it does not feel empty. It feels held. The farmer's daily movement continues, but it has become more like maintenance of a steady world rather than response to immediate needs. The walk to the barn is always the same, always familiar. Snow underfoot. Cold air across the face. A quiet sense of rhythm in each step. Inside the barn, life remains the center of activity during winter. It is warm in a way the outside world is not. Not because of fire or sunlight, but because of presence. Animals breathing. Shifting. Resting. Existing together in a shared space of shelter. The horse remains calm, its movements minimal but steady. Cows lie or stand depending on the hour, their routine simple and unchanging. Chickens cluster together, small and quiet, conserving warmth as they wait for longer days to return. Feeding them becomes one of the most important tasks of the day. Simple work. Necessary work. Work that holds the structure of winter life together. Outside, snow continues its slow transformation. Sometimes it hardens after cold nights, forming a firm surface that holds weight more easily. Sometimes it softens again under slightly warmer air, shifting and settling in quiet ways that change the shape of the landscape without drawing attention. The wind, when it comes, moves low and smooth across the fields, carrying cold air without sound. There is a kind of honesty in winter's weather. It does not pretend to be anything other than what it is. Afternoons pass gently. There is no pressure to fill them. No expectation beyond warmth and basic care. The farmhouse becomes a place of soft continuity. Firelight. Quiet movement. Occasional sound of tools or footsteps. Sometimes the simple act of sitting near the window and watching snow shift across the yard is enough to mark the passing of time. Meals continue in their steady rhythm. Warm food. Simple preparation. Shared presence without urgency. Evenings arrive early, but they do not feel shortened. They feel complete. Lanterns glow in familiar corners. The fire burns steadily, its light deepening as night approaches. Outside, darkness settles over the snow with a calm inevitability. The fields disappear into shadow and white, becoming part of a larger stillness that stretches far beyond what the eye can see. There is a silence here that is not absence, but fullness. A silence shaped by rest. By distance. By time slowing down to its quietest form. Inside, the farmhouse remains warm and steady. And as the night settles fully over the land, there is a quiet understanding in everything that remains, that winter is not a pause in life, but a deeper layer of it. A time where nothing is lost, only held gently, until the world is ready once again to begin. As winter slowly begins to loosen its grip, even before any clear sign of spring appears, the farm starts to feel a subtle change. It is not something that can be seen at first. It is something felt. In the way the air inside the farmhouse no longer feels quite as heavy in the early mornings. In the way the fire is still needed, but not quite as urgently as before. In the way the days, though still cold, seem to carry a faint sense of length returning. The land outside remains covered in snow, but it no longer feels as unchanging as it once did. There are small differences now. Places where the snow settles differently after a night of wind. Thin patches where the ground beneath begins to influence the surface again. Soft hints of shape returning beneath white stillness. Inside the farmhouse, life continues its steady winter rhythm. Breakfast is still warm. The fire is still central. The house still holds everyone close in its quiet, familiar way. But there is a sense that something is shifting just beyond reach. The farmer notices it during the morning walk to the barn. The cold is still present, but it feels slightly less sharp on some days. The light, when it arrives, has a different quality, less harsh, a little more forgiving, as if the sky itself is slowly preparing to change its tone. The barn remains warm and steady. Animals continue their winter routine without interruption. But even there, small signs appear. The horse becomes slightly more alert during brighter mornings. Cows shift more frequently near doors where light enters. Chickens respond a little more actively when the door is opened for feeding. Nothing dramatic. Just small awakenings within stillness. Outside, the fields remain quiet beneath snow. But the snow itself begins to behave differently over time. Some days it softens slightly in the warmth of the sun. Other days it remains firm and frozen, holding its shape more clearly. The surface of the land begins to show variation again, subtle at first, like a memory returning slowly to awareness. Afternoons inside the farmhouse feel a little longer now. The fire still burns steadily, but its presence feels less like protection and more like comfort. There is more natural light in the room during certain hours. Light that lingers a little longer through windows. Light that feels less distant than it did in deep winter. Work continues in its quiet winter form. Firewood is still gathered, but less urgently. Tools are checked and repaired with a sense of gradual preparation rather than immediate necessity. There is an unspoken awareness that the season is approaching its turning point. Even though nothing outside confirms it yet in full, the feeling grows steadily within daily life. Evenings remain early, but they begin to feel less compressed. There is a little more space between daylight and darkness. A little more softness in the transition. The sky, when clear, holds a slightly different tone. Still cold. Still deep. But not quite as heavy as midwinter. Inside, the farmhouse continues its calm rhythm. Lanterns are lit. The fire glows. Meals are shared slowly. Silence is still common, but it feels different now. Less like stillness of deep rest. More like stillness before movement. Outside, the snow-covered fields remain quiet, but there are moments when the wind moves differently across them, shifting surface layers in ways that hint at change beneath. The land is not yet waking. But it is no longer fully asleep. And this in-between feeling becomes part of the rhythm of the days. A quiet awareness that the cycle is close to turning again. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. But slowly, the way everything on the farm always changes. Inside the barn, the air feels slightly different during late afternoons. Warmth still fills the space, but there is a subtle contrast now when outside light lingers a little longer. Animals respond to this in small ways that are almost imperceptible. A shift in posture. A moment of stillness near a doorway. A slight change in rest patterns. Everything remains calm. But everything is beginning to notice, in its own way, that winter is not endless. The farmer feels this too during evening walks back from the barn. The cold air is still present, but it carries a different quality now. Less absolute. Less enclosing. The sky above the fields sometimes shows faint variation in color near the horizon, as if light is beginning to test its return. And as night falls, the farmhouse remains a steady glow in the center of the frozen landscape. Warm. Constant. Familiar. Inside, there is no urgency for change. Only awareness that change is slowly approaching. Outside, the farm rests in its final stretch of winter stillness. Not as something ending abruptly, but as something gently preparing to loosen its hold. And in that quiet preparation, the cycle remains whole, patient, steady, and always moving forward in ways that are felt long before they are seen. By the time late winter settles into its final stretch, the farm feels like it is holding its breath. Not in tension, but in quiet expectation. The kind that comes after a long period of stillness, when even the smallest change begins to feel meaningful. The mornings are still cold, but they no longer feel as heavy as before. The air outside the farmhouse carries a clearer edge, and on some days, there is a softness in it that did not exist earlier in the season. The sky appears brighter even when it is overcast, as if light is beginning to gather behind the clouds rather than simply pass through them. Inside, the farmhouse remains warm and steady. The fire continues its familiar work, but it no longer feels like it is fighting against deep, overwhelming cold. It feels more like it is maintaining comfort. A steady companion rather than a shield. Breakfast continues in its quiet rhythm. Warm food. Simple preparation. The same familiar table. The same calm beginning to each day. Outside, the land is still covered in snow, but the surface is no longer completely uniform. Subtle changes begin to appear. Some areas of snow look slightly thinner after sunny days. Other areas remain firm and untouched in shadowed places. The fields are still resting, but they are no longer entirely unchanged. The farmer notices these differences during morning walks to the barn. The path is still cold beneath his boots, but it feels more familiar now, less harsh in its presence. Inside the barn, life remains steady, but there is a subtle shift in atmosphere. The animals are still in winter routine, but they respond more noticeably to light when it enters through open doors. The horse lifts its head a little more often during brighter hours. Cows move with slightly more activity during midday. Chickens become a bit more scattered when they are released briefly into sheltered yard spaces. Nothing dramatic changes. But everything begins to feel slightly more aware. More awake in small ways. Work in the barn continues as always, feeding, cleaning, checking water, but even this begins to feel less like sustaining survival and more like maintaining continuity. Outside, the wind begins to change its character. It still carries cold air, but there are moments when it moves differently across the land. Less sharp. Less constant. Occasionally, it feels as though it is passing through something softer, as if the world is beginning to loosen its winter hold. Afternoons inside the farmhouse now feel noticeably longer. Not because the days are fully warming yet, but because light is slowly returning in small increments. The sun sits slightly higher than it did in deep winter. Its presence through windows feels less distant. Shadows inside the house shift in more gradual ways. There is a growing sense that time is beginning to expand again. Not quickly, but steadily. The fire still burns each day, but its role shifts subtly. It remains essential for warmth, but it also becomes a place of gathering, reflection, and simple presence. The sound of burning wood fills the house in a familiar way, but now it is joined by longer moments of daylight filtering in alongside it. The contrast between firelight and natural light begins to feel more balanced. Evenings, though still early, begin to feel less compressed. There is a slight stretching of time between daylight and darkness. A softness in the transition that did not exist during the deepest part of winter. Outside, the fields continue their slow transformation beneath the snow. In some places, faint outlines of the land begin to reappear. Small variations in shape. Subtle shifts in texture. Signs that the ground beneath is no longer completely sealed away from change. The farmer walks the edges of these fields less out of necessity now, and more out of awareness. A quiet acknowledgement that the season is nearing its turn. The barn remains a steady anchor through all of this. Warm. Familiar. Unchanging in structure, even as the world outside begins to shift. Animals continue their routines, but there is a gentle increase in movement and responsiveness as days slowly lengthen. It is not restlessness. Just a quiet return of awareness. Inside the farmhouse, life continues in its steady rhythm, but something subtle has changed in how it feels. There is a sense of continuation rather than repetition. A feeling that the cycle is no longer fully in its resting phase, but beginning to turn again in its deepest, slowest way. And as night settles over the farm, the contrast between the warm glow of the house and the quiet, fading winter outside becomes even more gentle than before. The world is still cold. Still quiet. Still resting. But not quite as deeply as it once was. And in that subtle shift, the farm exists in a moment of quiet transition between winter's long stillness and the faint, patient return of spring that has not yet arrived, but is already on its way. By the final stretch of late winter, the change becomes easier to feel, even if it is still hard to see. It is not a change that announces itself. It arrives the way dawn arrives in the early morning, gradually, without sound, without force, only becoming clear once it is already present. The cold is still here. The snow still covers the fields. The world outside still holds its quiet, familiar stillness. But something in it feels less permanent now. More temporary. Inside the farmhouse, mornings continue their steady rhythm. The fire is still the first movement of the day, but now there are moments when the house does not feel as deeply chilled when the first light arrives. Warmth holds a little longer overnight. Cold enters a little more slowly. Breakfast remains simple and warm, but the sense of heaviness that marked deep winter has softened slightly. The same food. The same table. But a quieter sense that time is moving forward again. Outside, the farmer notices changes in the snow during his morning walk to the barn. Some days the surface is firmer, shaped by overnight frost. Other days it softens slightly under weak midday sun, even if only for a short time. The land is still resting. But it is no longer completely still. Inside the barn, life continues with steady familiarity. Animals remain calm, but their behavior shows small signs of responsiveness to the changing light. The horse spends slightly more time alert during mornings when sunlight filters through gaps in the barn walls. Cows shift positions more often during midday, responding to subtle changes in temperature. Chickens move with a bit more energy when briefly allowed into sheltered outdoor space. Nothing is sudden. Everything is gradual. The barn itself feels the same as always, warm, steady, reliable, but even within it, there is a subtle feeling that the season outside is preparing to turn. Work remains simple: feeding, cleaning, maintaining warmth, checking supplies. But even these tasks begin to feel less like sustaining winter and more like carrying the farm gently toward what comes next. Outside, the wind changes its tone again. It still carries cold air, but it does so with less intensity. There are moments when it moves across the fields without the deep weight it held earlier in the season. It feels lighter in passing. Less persistent. Afternoons inside the farmhouse begin to feel noticeably different. Light lasts a little longer through the windows. The sun, though still low, seems to linger in the sky just a bit more than before. Shadows shift more slowly across the floor. Time feels less compressed. There is more space within the day. The fire continues its steady presence, but now it shares attention with the returning light. Both warmth and daylight exist together in a more balanced way. Evenings still arrive early, but their arrival feels less abrupt. The transition from day to night has softened. There is a gentle blending of light rather than a quick fading. Outside, the fields remain quiet under their winter cover, but subtle changes continue beneath the surface. Snow no longer feels entirely uniform. Some areas hold longer. Some begin to thin slightly during warmer hours. The land beneath is still resting, but it is no longer sealed away from change. The farmer's awareness of this grows naturally through daily observation. Each walk to the barn becomes a quiet reminder that the season is shifting, even if slowly. Even if almost imperceptibly. Inside the farmhouse, life maintains its calm rhythm. Meals are shared without hurry. Small tasks are completed steadily. Even silence feels comfortable in a different way now, not just stillness, but anticipation softened by patience. The fire remains a constant companion through the evening hours. Its glow fills the house with warmth that feels especially comforting against the lingering cold outside. And as night settles over the farm, the contrast between the warm interior and the quiet, fading winter landscape becomes gentler, less absolute. The world is still in winter. But not in its deepest form anymore. Something has begun to shift. Quietly. Slowly. And with complete patience. The farm stands in that in-between place now where winter has not yet ended, but spring has already begun to exist in feeling, just beyond the edge of sight, waiting for its first clear arrival. By this point in late winter, the farm exists in a quiet in-between that feels almost weightless. Not because anything has changed in a dramatic way. But because everything is beginning to loosen, slowly, like a long-held stillness finally letting go. The mornings still begin cold. That much remains the same. But the cold is no longer absolute. There are small differences now, the kind that only reveal themselves through repetition. Some mornings the air feels softer against the skin. Some mornings the frost on the ground is thinner, fading sooner after sunrise. Some mornings the light itself feels less distant, as if it is returning in careful steps rather than waiting far away. Inside the farmhouse, warmth has become more balanced with the outside world. The fire is still central to the rhythm of the day, but it no longer feels like the only source of comfort. Occasionally, the rooms hold on to warmth a little longer from the previous day. The house does not lose heat as quickly as it once did in deep winter. Breakfast continues its steady pattern. Warm food. Simple preparation. The same quiet beginning each morning. But there is a subtle difference in how the day feels after it begins. Less enclosed. More open. Outside, the farmer continues the familiar walk to the barn. The path is still lined with snow, but it is no longer perfectly unchanged. Some sections feel softer underfoot. Others show signs of subtle melting during midday hours. The land is not yet awake, but it is no longer completely still. Inside the barn, the atmosphere remains steady and warm. Animals continue their routines with calm consistency, but there is a quiet shift in how they respond to light and time. The horse is more attentive during brighter mornings. The cows adjust their positions more frequently as daylight begins to last slightly longer. The chickens show brief moments of increased activity when the barn doors open and a hint of outside air moves through. Everything remains peaceful. But there is a growing sense of awareness within that peace. Daily tasks in the barn continue without change: feeding, cleaning, checking supplies, but even these routines begin to feel less like sustaining winter and more like maintaining a steady bridge towards something beyond it. Outside, the wind shifts again in subtle ways. It still carries cold, but it no longer feels as heavy or constant as before. There are moments when it moves gently across the fields, almost softly, brushing over snow rather than pressing into it. The sound of it feels less sharp, more distant. Afternoons inside the farmhouse carry a different kind of light now. The sun remains low, but its presence lasts a little longer each day. Light moves slowly across wooden floors and walls, shifting in wider patterns than it did in deep winter. The house feels brighter in a gradual way that is easy to miss unless it is noticed over time. The fire continues to burn steadily, but it is now joined more noticeably by daylight. Warmth no longer comes from one source alone. It comes from both fire and sun, existing together in a quiet balance. Evenings still arrive early, but their arrival feels less final. The transition from day to night has softened. There is more lingering light at the horizon. More gentle fading instead of sudden darkening. Outside, the fields remain under snow, but their appearance is no longer entirely uniform. Some areas show faint changes in texture during warmer hours. Others remain firm and unchanged in shaded places. The land is still resting deeply, but it is no longer closed off from the world above it. The farmer observes these changes in silence during his daily movements. Not as something urgent, but as something natural. Something expected. Something that always comes in time. Inside the farmhouse, life continues with quiet steadiness. Meals are shared calmly. Small tasks are completed without rush. The fire remains a steady presence through the evening hours, its light soft and familiar. And in that glow, there is a growing sense that the season is beginning to turn, even if the full arrival of spring is still out of sight. Outside, the farm rests under its final stretch of winter calm. Not as something ending abruptly, but as something gently preparing to shift. The world is still cold. Still quiet. Still covered in snow. But beneath that stillness, something has already begun to move again. Slowly. Quietly. And with the same patient rhythm that has always guided the land forward. At this stage of late winter, the farm feels like it is standing very still on the surface, while something deep underneath is quietly changing. Nothing obvious announces it. There are no sudden shifts. No dramatic signs. Only small, repeated details that begin to add up over time. The mornings still arrive cold, but the quality of that cold is different now. It feels less heavy. Less enclosing. There are moments when the air outside the farmhouse feels almost clear enough to carry a hint of softness in it, even while frost still covers the ground. Inside the house, the fire continues its steady roll. It is still necessary. Still tended carefully each morning and throughout the day. But it no longer feels like it is holding back something overwhelming. Instead, it feels like a companion to the season, rather than a defense against it. The rooms retain warmth a little longer now. Not enough to remove the need for fire, but enough to be noticed. Breakfast remains simple and familiar. Warm food shared quietly at the table. The same rhythm each morning. The same gentle beginning. Outside, the walk to the barn continues in its steady repetition. The path through snow is still firm, but it is beginning to show subtle variation depending on the time of day. Some mornings the surface feels slightly softened. Other mornings it holds a thin crust that breaks gently underfoot. The farmer notices these changes without needing to focus on them. They are simply part of the season's slow movement. Inside the barn, life remains steady and warm. Animals continue their winter routines, but there is a quiet shift in how they respond to the world around them. The horse stands a little more alert during mornings when light feels stronger through the barn walls. Cows shift more often as they respond to slight changes in temperature and daylight. Chickens move with small bursts of activity when the doors open and a hint of outside air enters. Everything remains calm. But there is a growing sense of responsiveness. A slow return of awareness. Daily work in the barn continues in its familiar form: feeding, cleaning, checking water, but even this begins to feel less like maintaining survival and more like supporting a steady transition toward change. Outside, the wind begins to feel less constant. It still passes across the fields, but its presence is lighter now. There are moments of still air between its movements. Moments where the world feels almost paused, rather than pressed by cold. Afternoons inside the farmhouse feel subtly longer. Light lasts more noticeably through the windows. The sun sits slightly higher in the sky than it did in the deepest part of winter, and its presence lingers a little longer before fading. Shadows inside the house shift in slower, wider arcs. Time feels less compressed. More open. The fire continues to burn steadily, but now it shares its presence with returning daylight in a more balanced way. Warmth comes from multiple directions again. From flame. From sun. From the gradual softening of the season itself. Evenings still arrive early, but their arrival is gentler now. The transition from light to darkness feels less sudden, more drawn out, as if the day is reluctant to fully end. Outside, the fields remain covered in snow, but the surface is no longer entirely uniform. There are faint variations in brightness after sunlight touches them. Subtle changes in texture where wind or warmth has shifted the upper layer. The land is still deeply at rest. But it is no longer completely sealed. The farmer walks the edge of the fields in quiet observation, not searching for change, but noticing it as it appears naturally. Each detail is small on its own. But together they form a pattern. A slow turning. Inside the farmhouse, life continues in its steady rhythm. Meals are shared without hurry. Small tasks are completed calmly. The fire remains the center of evening comfort, its light steady and familiar. And in that warmth, there is an unspoken awareness that the season is moving forward again, even if it has not yet fully arrived. Outside, the farm rests in its final stage of winter stillness. Not frozen in place, but gently shifting. The world is still cold. Still quiet. Still covered in snow. But beneath that surface, the long cycle of the land is already turning once more, preparing slowly, patiently for the first true arrival of spring. By now, late winter no longer feels like a single season. It feels like a space between two things. A long, quiet bridge where one side is deep stillness, and the other is something not yet visible, but already present in feeling. The farm exists fully inside that space. The mornings are still cold, but they carry a gentler edge than before. The air outside the farmhouse no longer feels as heavy when the door first opens. It is still winter air, still sharp in its own way, but it no longer presses in quite as strongly. Inside, the fire continues its steady presence. It is still tended with care every day, but its role feels slightly different now. Less like protection. More like comfort. A familiar warmth that belongs to the house in every season, not only in the coldest one. The rooms hold onto heat a little longer, and the difference is noticeable only in quiet moments, the way the morning chill does not linger quite as deeply in corners, or the way evening warmth fades a little more slowly than before. Breakfast remains unchanged in its simplicity. Warm food. Quiet beginning. The same rhythm that has carried through every winter morning. Outside, the walk to the barn continues in its familiar pattern. The snow is still present, still covering the ground, but its surface is no longer perfectly uniform. Some areas feel softer after sunlight. Some remain firm in shadow. The path itself becomes a little more varied with each passing day, as if the land is slowly learning how to shift again after long stillness. Inside the barn, life continues in its steady, reliable rhythm. The horse remains calm, but there are moments when it stands with a slightly more alert posture during brighter hours. Cows adjust their positions more frequently, responding to subtle changes in light and warmth. Chickens move in small, scattered bursts when the barn doors open, briefly aware of the outside world before returning to their clustered quiet. Everything remains peaceful. But everything also feels slightly more awake. Daily tasks continue without change: feeding, cleaning, checking supplies, but even these simple actions begin to feel like part of a slow transition rather than maintenance of deep winter alone. Outside, the wind changes its behavior again. It still carries cold, but it does not linger as heavily as it once did. There are pauses between its movements now. Moments of still air that feel almost unexpected after months of constant winter presence. Afternoons inside the farmhouse carry more light than before. The sun does not rise higher in any dramatic way, but its presence is more noticeable. It stays in the sky a little longer. It moves a little more slowly across the rooms. It softens the edges of the day in a way that feels gradual and steady. The fire remains strong, but it is no longer the only source of visible warmth. Daylight and firelight begin to share the house more evenly. Evenings still arrive early, but they no longer feel as final. The shift from day to night is more drawn out, more gentle, as if the world is taking its time to settle rather than closing quickly into darkness. Outside, the fields remain under snow, but the surface is beginning to show faint variation. Not melting in any clear sense yet, but changing in texture. Some areas reflect light differently. Some hold shadows more deeply. The land is still resting, but it is no longer completely uniform in its rest. The farmer continues to observe these changes in silence during daily movement. Not searching for transformation, but recognizing its gradual arrival. Inside the farmhouse, life remains steady. Meals are shared in calm repetition. Small tasks continue without urgency. The fire remains a constant presence through evening hours, its glow filling the room with familiar warmth. And in that steady light, there is a growing awareness that the season is quietly shifting, even if the full arrival of change is still ahead. Outside, the farm remains in its final stretch of winter calm. Not frozen. Not ending. But slowly, gently turning towards something new. The world is still quiet. Still cold. Still resting beneath snow. But beneath all of that, the long cycle of the land continues its patient movement forward toward a spring that is not yet visible, but already beginning to exist in the way the air feels, the way light lingers, and the way stillness is slowly starting to loosen its hold. At this point in late winter, the farm feels as if it has learned how to exist inside stillness without becoming lost in it. The days continue in their quiet rhythm, but there is a subtle sense that the rhythm itself is beginning to change shape. Not breaking. Not rushing. Just shifting, almost imperceptibly, like the slow turning of something very large and very patient. The mornings are still cold when they begin. That has not changed. But the quality of the cold feels different now. It is less dense, less enclosing. When the farmer steps outside, the air meets him with a familiar chill, but it no longer feels as heavy as it once did in deep winter. Inside the farmhouse, the fire remains steady through every morning. It is still the center of warmth, still essential, still tended with care. But now there are moments when the house does not feel as dependent on it as before. Warmth lingers a little longer after the fire has been fed. The walls seem to hold heat more gently. Not enough to change the routine, but enough to be noticed in quiet moments. Breakfast continues its steady presence each day. Warm food. Simple preparation. A calm beginning that does not change with the season's subtle shift. Outside, the walk to the barn remains part of the morning rhythm. The snow is still there, still covering the land, but it is no longer entirely uniform in its stillness. Some mornings the surface feels slightly softer underfoot. Other mornings it holds a firmer crust shaped by colder nights. The path itself becomes a record of these small variations over time. Inside the barn, life continues with its steady winter calm. Animals remain quiet and settled, but their responsiveness to light and time continues to increase in small ways. The horse stands a little more alert when morning light is stronger. Cows shift positions more often during midday hours. Chickens move in small, scattered bursts when doors open and outside air briefly enters. Everything remains peaceful. But there is a growing sense of awareness within that peace. Daily tasks continue without interruption: feeding, cleaning, checking water, but they begin to feel less like sustaining winter and more like maintaining balance during transition. Outside, the wind is no longer as constant as it once was. It still moves across the fields, but there are longer pauses between its presence. Moments of still air become more noticeable, almost unfamiliar after months of steady movement. Afternoons inside the farmhouse feel subtly different now. Light remains in the sky a little longer. The sun is still low, but it no longer feels quite as distant as it did in the deepest part of winter. It moves slowly across the rooms, touching familiar surfaces with a softer presence. Shadows shift gently, without urgency. Time feels less compressed, more open. The fire continues to burn steadily, but it is now part of a shared warmth with daylight that is slowly returning in strength. Evenings still arrive early, but they do not feel as abrupt. The transition from light to darkness has softened further, stretching out in a gradual fading rather than a quick descent. Outside, the fields remain under snow, but their surface shows more variation than before. Some areas reflect light differently after sunny hours. Other areas remain shaded and firm. The land is still in deep rest, but it is no longer completely uniform in its stillness. The farmer moves through these changes quietly, without expectation. Only observation. Only awareness. Inside the farmhouse, life continues as it always has in the season. Meals are shared calmly. Small tasks are completed without urgency. The fire remains the steady heart of evening warmth, its glow filling the house with a familiar sense of shelter. And within that steady glow, there is an understanding that the season is nearing its final turn. Not yet fully changed. Not yet fully released. But no longer fully still. Outside, the farm remains in the final quiet of winter. A space between rest and return. And beneath that quiet, the long cycle of the land continues its gentle movement forward, slow, patient, and inevitable toward the first true softness of spring. By the time winter reaches its quiet end on the farm, there is no clear moment when it finishes. It does not end like a story closing a door. It ends like something slowly loosening its grip. One morning, the cold is still there. The snow is still present across the fields. The farmhouse still holds the same warm fire at its center. And yet, something feels different in a way that is almost impossible to point at. The air outside the door is less sharp than it once was. Not warm. Not soft. Just less heavy than before. Inside the house, the rhythm of life remains unchanged on the surface. The fire is still tended each morning. Breakfast is still warm and simple. The same quiet movements still fill the early hours of the day. But there is a sense now that the house is no longer holding against winter. It is simply living within it until it passes. Outside, the walk to the barn continues as always. The path is still lined with snow, but its edges feel less rigid. Some areas are beginning to sink slightly under their own weight. Others show faint signs of thinning after days when sunlight lingers just a little longer. The barn remains steady, warm, and familiar. Animals continue their calm routines, but there is a quiet increase in presence, a subtle responsiveness that grows with each passing day. Light feels more meaningful when it enters the space. Movements feel slightly more active, though still gentle, still winter-held. Everything remains in balance. But the balance is beginning to shift. Outside, the fields are still covered, but the snow no longer feels like a single unbroken layer. It has texture now. Variation. Depth. The land beneath is not visible yet, but it is beginning to influence the surface again in ways that were not present before. Afternoons bring more light into the farmhouse. Not enough to warm the land fully, but enough to make the rooms feel different in a quiet, noticeable way. Shadows stretch differently across wooden floors. Windows hold brightness a little longer. The fire is still important, still central, but it no longer feels like the only source of warmth in the day. Evenings remain calm, but they feel less enclosed. The transition from day to night stretches softly, as if the world is no longer in a hurry to settle into darkness. And somewhere in this slow unfolding, the farm enters a moment that cannot be clearly marked. Winter is still present. But it is no longer absolute. Spring is not yet visible. But it is no longer absent. It exists in the way the air changes slightly from one day to the next. In the way the light lingers just a little longer. In the way the land beneath the snow begins to feel less sealed away from time. The farmer moves through these days without naming the change. There is no need to name it. It is understood in the rhythm of work, in the quiet observation of fields, in the steady return of small differences that build over time. Inside the farmhouse, life continues as it always has. Warmth. Food. Firelight. Silence shared in comfort rather than emptiness. And outside, the farm remains still but not unchanged. The long winter has not ended in a single moment. It has simply softened until it can no longer hold its shape as firmly as before. And in that softening, the cycle continues forward, as it always has, and always will. Not as an ending. Not as a beginning. But as a slow, steady return of everything that has ever grown from the land, rested in the land, and will one day rise from it again.